How many of you have gone to the doctor and you get a physical or you know something's wrong and nobody seems to be able to figure it out? Nobody seems to have the time to figure it out. Or you go to the doctor and you get your blood work and this is what you get. Good to go. Well, let me tell you this, you might not be good to go. Doctors are getting lazy. And so I want to tell you guys about functional medicine. So functional medicine are doctors who actually care about your health and they're going to go the extra mile to make sure you're healthy and educate you on what you should be doing to lead a healthier lifestyle. So I brought on a functional neurologist. Super informative episode. The doc is just a remarkable human being. It was an awesome interview. He goes over all kinds of stuff in the brain, the anatomy of the brain, things that will help you prevent Alzheimer's, dementia, lots of brain health stuff. Super informative episode. And he cares. He's a functional neurologist. He came into the studio and actually mapped my brain, talks about my TBI. It's fascinating stuff. I hope you all enjoy it. Ladies and gentlemen, if you like this show, please leave us a review on Spotify and on Apple Podcasts, Patreon. Love you all. Thank you. Actually, the Doc Bagnell, is a patron. He's a patron, and that's how I found him. So thank you, Doc, for the support. And anyways, without further ado, please welcome functional neurologist, Dr. Michael Bagnell, to the Shawn Ryan Show. Cheers. One last thing before the show starts. Everybody wants to know how to keep your mind sharp, right? So the first thing the doc says, the best thing to do if you don't get to this part is get moving. Move your body, which is what I just got done doing a nice workout. So, you want to stay sharp? Get off your ass and get in the gym. All right, enjoy the show. Dr. Michael Bagnell, welcome to the Shawn Ryan Show.
Super honored to be here.
It's
so looking forward to it.
Thank you. We've been talking for a while, and I'm just super excited to have you in the chair, and I have a ton of questions for you. But first, everybody starts with a gift. You got any ideas?
I think Vigilance Elite Pretzels.
We're gonna have to send you back home.
Wow. These are, I'm definitely looking forward to it. And nobody ever comes with a gift for you. So my wife and I decided, talking with your wife, we have a gift for you.
Oh, I love presents.
So.
Oh, I got a feeling I know what this is.
Hold on.
Is this from Triple? Yep. Oh my gosh.
So we appreciate you.
These are amazing.
Those are for you, bro.
And I will be digging into these on the first break. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Excited.
Triple Crown Bakery in Franklin. If those of you that don't know, it's definitely worth the trip.
We're setting the bar for all the future guests, they must stop by and bring you that.
So we got a lot to talk about. And my first question is short-term memory loss. When you forget what you're saying mid-sentence, this happens to me all the time. Happens when I'm talking to my wife. It happens when I'm on camera. It actually went away for a couple months after I did my psychedelic treatment, and now it's back. What is that?
Well, it's difficult to say what it is, but we can talk about why it might start coming up. And so, and this is just an idea, because whenever I'm talking with somebody about a particular symptom that they have, a condition, something they're suffering with that they'd want to improve, like this, where we're losing focus, it would seem, on what the subject we're talking about. So we have to start thinking about just regions of the brain, networks of the brain. So we know that speech and memory, we know where those areas kind of lie in the brain, in the landscape. Speech for men is mostly on the left. The ability to understand what you're saying and me to interpret it and then speak back is mostly left brain with men. Women tend to be bilateral, so they recover better from strokes, their speech, if so. But in memory is in another area, a little bit lower in the temporal lobes, which we'll show you in this model in just a minute. But we're having kind of a disconnect in the ability to maintain the thought, the working memory, which is what we're talking about here. It's not long-term, it's short-term. It's like right now, right now, right now. And being able to keep that short-term memory in the forefront. So I'm thinking, when I hear that, I'm thinking, okay, what's happening in the frontal lobe, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex? I'll use language that's more scientific just because it's in my wheelhouse all the time, but I'll kind of try to break that down a little bit. So the frontal lobe, it's your executive function. It's like what's happening right now, making decisions and organizing your thoughts. Maybe you're thinking even about the next question you want to ask me. It's all happening in that frontal.
Okay.
But maintaining what I just said or what you just said is also happening between the frontal, the temporal lobes, and so networks come together. So when we think about it, I first think, what's going on in this person's brain that might be now projecting this effect? So I look at it more globally rather than thinking, let's just work on their speech or just their memory. I want to see globally what's going on. So I have to take a step back from really every symptom. Even if I have 5 people with the same symptom, 3 men and 2 women, I still have to take a step back and look at their brain as a whole to understand what might be the causes, what might be contributing, what might be the therapies for them afterwards, if we can do something, right? Because that's something we talked a lot about. People go and they get assessments, high-tech scans, and then they just don't know what to do with that data to help themselves. It's like it confirms you have a problem. Good, that is helpful. It lowers anxiety. Yes, I have this problem. But what am I going to do with that? Or can I do something with that? So my answer is, to what is that, we wouldn't know until we started to get in there and start to work with some of the structures and see, can we alter that? But I would first put my pin in working memory in the frontal lobe.
Okay.
I'd like to say, okay, let's see what's going on in that frontal lobe. And with that in mind, we just did a brain map on you. So we did an EEG or a QEEG, right? I mentioned a EKG for the heart. An EEG is done for the brain. Well, we did a QEEG. It's a version of that where we can look at a brain map.
Okay.
And we got some results from that, which would tell me, oh, okay, this might be something that's going on in your brain that might be contributing to that issue that you're talking about.
Okay. What are a few specific things that could be triggering that? Like, could it be a traumatic brain injury? Could it be
Absolutely
TB or PTSD?
Yeah.
It could be.
Both together, yeah. So anytime we have a mild, and there's more than 50 definitions of concussion. So this is and they just came out of the conference, the consensus conference earlier this year in Amsterdam and they do this every few years to try to understand what's the current data, what's the current understanding. So when people think they have a concussion, generally a person thinks it's more mild compared to a MTBI, a minor traumatic brain injury. That seems more, ooh. And anyone who's in the military, who's served, has heard enough rounds going off, had enough things that could have created multiple concussive forces to the brain and then changed the electrical activity, the chemical activity in the brain that could contribute to those. So absolutely.
Okay. Could it also be from ADHD, ADD, maybe just having too much going on at one time?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we were talking about this the other night, that a lot of times people have these subsequent conditions. A person would say, I have ADD or I have ADHD or my child. And then they have a concussion and they had ADHD before that. Or they had anxiety and they had a concussion or a brain injury after. So you can have different things that can occur, but you have these underlying conditions.
Okay.
So I guess I could say, like, if I'm training for the military, but I previously had a knee injury and I had a back injury when I was a kid. Now I'm training and now I flare up some of these things and now I have a bigger problem with my knee and my back and now it's my shoulder because I brought to the party already an imbalance or something that wasn't strong when I brought, and neurologically that happens to a lot of us. We have a trauma as a kid, we have some sports, we have some injuries, we get really ill at one point, we have the inflammation from things, we have a poor diet, and we bring all that stuff to the party of whether it's a brain injury or whether it's PTSD and exposure to something that's really traumatic. And now our brain is working on top of all that other stuff in the background. So yes, I mean, the different conditions or symptoms that people have are really a picture of what's happening in their brain.
Okay. Well, Doc, we got a lot to talk about. We're going to talk about anxiety, memory, Alzheimer's, dementia, TBI, effects of social media, psychedelics, marijuana. We got a lot of stuff to cover. But while we're on the memory topic, I've always been curious. I've heard rumors that every memory that everything that you've experienced since birth is in your brain. You just are unable to actually access all those different memories. And some things we remember, some things we don't remember. Where is all this stored? It's not like I can cut your brain open and find some memories in there.
Right,
you know?
right. Yeah, there isn't that aspect of it, right? So, here's a brain model. Well, actually, I'll just keep it together. So here's the model. Here's the front of the brain. Here's the back of the brain, the side view from the right. And we see, of course, this is all colorized, but it helps us understand things with the colors. And these are brain regions, and they all have different kinds of cells, okay? So that's probably as deep as we'll go into that. But here's that frontal lobe up here. All this is actually the frontal lobe, the green all the way forward. Actually, the red all the way forward is the frontal lobe. This is the motor strip. So when you have a thought about something and you want to do something, I want to raise my arm up, this red area is going to start firing up a program.
Okay.
Think about it like a computer program. You plug it in, here we go. And it's going to move that arm. So if I'm going to move my right arm, then the left side of my brain on this motor cortex is going to say, send it to that right arm and those muscles. So I'll say this right out of the gate, because I mentioned another myth that's been debunked, but I lay this on top of Dr. Andrew Huberman out of Stanford, that there is no muscle memory.
There is no muscle memory.
No. We use the adage, we say, muscle memory, and I'm not here to correct everyone, but since Dr. Huberman corrected everyone also, I'm just going to ride on his coattails, because it's really the brain. That's the memory that sets up the program, the motor program to do something. So it's like riding a bike, right? We always heard that. It's muscle memory. Muscles have no memory. But the brain has a memory program for riding a bike.
Okay.
Even if you haven't done it for 50 years. And it will kick those muscles into gear, so to speak, activate them so that it starts, and the balance mechanism is like, hey, you remember this? And starts running that old program again so you can then carry out that function.
Okay.
That's kind of a neat one, though.
That is interesting.
Because we all think that, right? Muscle memory. And whether you say that or not, it's not here nor there. It's just, it's interesting to know. It's your brain. That's the memory for what you need to do again.
Okay.
So, front of the brain, you're going to have some of that working memory up here, motor actions. It's really your, I love the way one of the neuroscientists talks about the frontal brain is your simulator. It simulates everything. It's evaluating everything constantly. What am I going to do? If he does this, what should I do, right? So how important is that in military service? I mean, it's important in every human function. If I say this, what are they going to say? It's like a chess player. here, that frontal lobe. And then we move back here into the parietal lobe. Here's this blue strip is your sensation, everything you feel in your body. You feel your left hand on your thigh there. That's lighting up in the right side of your brain saying, I have some pressure on that thigh. So everything we feel is in that blue strip. So feeling and motor are right together, right? Because if I feel something on my leg that's kind of pinching me, I'm going to move my leg quickly, reactively. And so they have to be synchronized together.
Okay.
And we move back in the brain. We have vision back here. But on the side here is the temporal lobe. That's where the memory, the primary memory, let's say mechanisms are involved in that area, which is kind of neat. So if we take this apart a little bit, which I really love this stuff. All right, so we're looking on the inside here, right? And this round piece here is your emotional cortex, your limbic area. They used to say when someone goes limbic, right, they get really emotional, this limbic area. So this is what's really involved, the brainstem and this limbic area with PTSD.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is what's called by Sanjay Gupta from CNN. I was just mentioning to you about that. He's their medical person. He was saying this part of this real estate is the expensive real estate in the brain. We think, oh, it's got to be the frontal lobe. It's got to be something really unique. This brain stem is really the expensive real estate. This is what keeps us alive.
Okay.
This is where most of your neurochemistry is made. Serotonin, like when people have depression and they're on an SSRI, made in the brainstem. Acetylcholine for memory, given to people with early Alzheimer's, made in the brainstem. GABA to relax the brain or calm the person down, made in the brainstem. So dopamine to get you to do things and to drive and to focus. Your vigilance from dopamine, made in the brainstem. When we have a loss of that, now we're in Parkinson's. So all this stuff is made here chemically. And so this is a really unique piece, which we'll talk more about. But this area and your limbic area here, frontal lobe, all involved in PTSD.
Okay. Memory, though.
Memory.
Where is memory stored?
So memory is primarily stored in this temporal lobe out in here, the hippocampus. So it's got fancy names, but that's where that processing of memory occurs. And a lot of things link to it. I'll give you an example. So smell is linked to memory very much. Smell is more through the front of the brain, through the nose and certain nerves, but it links to that. Vision is, of course, linked to memory. So vision and what you're seeing is really recognized in the back of the brain, but then it links to memory. So I walk into our house and I smell apple pie. Oh, man, that reminds me of my grandmother's kitchen. In just a moment, I have a memory that's brought back up into my consciousness through smell.
Okay.
Or through sound, right? You hear something, boom, 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 and all of a sudden a memory of something comes back in. So a lot of different parts of the brain network to the temporal lobe. And you think about it, temporal, timing, right? Temporal, it's temporal in its way of collecting data. And so to go back to what you said, so I'm remembering in my working memory, going back to, do we remember everything throughout every aspect of our lives? I don't know. I don't know if they're ever able to with certainty say that we do, but we probably do.
Okay.
We probably do.
Why? What is stopping people from accessing certain memories?
Well, we know that there's pruning that occurs at an early age, like with your son. As their brain is developing, they have more neural connections, but they prune them back. So pruning, just like you prune a bush, it gets rid of things that are not absolutely necessary for now, for function. So it might be storing them. I don't know. But we know that there's pruning that takes place. You have a lot of neural connections, but it prunes them and it makes some of them stronger. And that's what we need. We need some connections to be very strong and others not that strong. So maybe that's part of it. Is when it prunes, does it store them? I don't know. Perhaps.
What about with trauma? So I'm going to give you an example. I'm asking, for women that have been, for a lot of the guys that have been on the show, have seen and experienced a lot of trauma. People everywhere experience a lot of trauma. And I've talked to a lot of operators who've come out of the psychedelic treatment and have accessed memories that they have no recollection of until they do that. I'll give you another example. One of my friends who's a SEAL watched his mother when he was a little guy, and had totally 100% blocked that out of his memory until he did his psychedelic experience, and that all came back. Another example would be a long time ago, I was doing this anti-piracy stuff. I'd run into a old sniper partner of mine who I didn't even remember was a sniper partner of mine. I knew him very well. We were friends. We've hung out a lot. He started talking about this mission we were on, and together had pictures, everything. I had zero recollection of that operation. None. But it obviously happened. And I was too embarrassed to tell him that I don't remember any of this.
Well, sometimes, I mean, and you know, we're touching on a lot of topics in that statement. Sometimes there can be a retrograde amnesia from a brain trauma. So you might lose something. And now it may be everything, but you know, previously retrograde, going backward.
Okay.
So it could be something like that, like somewhere following that mission with a head impact, maybe you lost some of that memory that was stored there, right? Mm-hmm. It also could be the suppression of memory by my own system to protect me, right? So, I mean, I talk about this with my wife all the time. There's we'll watch a movie that's heartrending and the father's really strong character and talking with the kids in a way, and I'm like, you know what? I don't want to watch this anymore. Because I can feel some of that memory stuff coming up in me that I'm like, nope, not going to go there.
Okay.
So in a way, I'm controlling it, but what am I doing? I'm holding down some memories. So I think also we know, and I'm not a mental health counselor, I'm not trained in mental health work. We work with excellent people in psychiatry, psychology, mental health counselors, all types of people in that realm. And we know that people can suppress for their own well-being. Their mind can suppress things for their own well-being so they can continue to go on. And so it's really fascinating to me after you did your psychedelic journey and had some people on that talked about it. I was so fascinated by it. So I started digging into some of the data. And what we know right now so far is that, well, what's going on in the brain when you do this that could bring back a memory of something or could help someone feel more recovered, more of their emotional state back? There's something called the default mode network. So again, in the brain we have regions, but we have networks that work together. And the default mode network is a little bit in the back of your brain, a little bit in the front of your brain, and to the sides of the brain. So it's this network of connections. And this network, so you have one in the front of the brain, I'll say that first, called the central executive network. It's the front of the brain, all these areas that link together to say, let's carry out this task right now. Then there's the default mode network. It kicks you back when you're like, okay, I'm just relaxing right now. I'm not really doing anything in particular. My brain goes into the default mode network. So kind of like think about like a toggle switch. Central executive, take care of action. Default mode network. Well, in the default mode network is where we have a sense of sitting back and like relaxing, taking things in. Also, it's our sense of self. It's also where we have a hope generated for our future. So think about that. Someone goes to military service, sees extremely traumatic things. Maybe they don't have so much of a hope and a vision for their future because they've just seen so much damage and so much carnage and all the things that they see. They may end up shutting down this default mode network. And if you don't have a proper balance between the central executive to carry things out and the default mode network, well, we're imbalanced. Like then I can do things, and I know some of the guests, I won't refer to them by name, but some of the guests, like I can just do and do and do things. I got to keep going. I got to be on Adderall. I got to keep, right? But I can't just sit back and like, just chill out.
I 100% have that issue.
So the default mode network is what is acted upon, not solely, but primarily through psychedelics.
Really?
Yes. And what does it do to it? That's what we don't know. It does, we think, because some studies say it creates more activity in it. Some studies say it creates better connectivity in it.
Really?
So that's the target, I believe. And again, I don't work with psychedelics. That's not my area of expertise, but just in my looking into the literature and trying to understand from research-based studies that are actually going on, and they're using it even at Stanford, so out there. So we know that this default mode network, something is going on, which then restores both of the networks, and there are other networks. So now you have more of a balance in this person. But what I like to think about is this sense of self. Because you come back, and I mean, I've seen it more in movies, and the few people that we worked with is, that's what I identify with. I don't identify with going to the farmer's market and doing these seemingly normal things when I've just been in that level of life. So I think the reconnection of that default mode network, and it can be done with other ways rather than just psychedelics, but it's showing very promising, right? I mean, it speaks for itself, what you experienced. So,
well, I really want to dive into the psychedelics topic, and I wanted to go into that a little bit later, but let's just do it now.
We're there.
I'm really curious. I mean, there's been a lot of benefits that I've personally received from psychedelics. A lot of my friends, former operators, have received a lot of, it's just been positive almost all the way around. But I do know of specific examples where psychedelics they either did nothing for, I'll just call them the patient, or it was actually harmful. And I have not heard, alls I've heard is psychedelics are great. Everybody's doing psychedelics. They're making these massive headway with them. But nobody's talking about the couple of cases. There's got to be more. That's just who I know, And one guy has migraines. He now has migraines on a regular basis. Never had migraines before. And the other two, I know 3 people that did not have a good psychedelic experience. Do you know of any negative side effects from this?
I do not, but I'm not that engaged in that network of people doing that. And although ketamine is another one that a lot of people are using and having benefits, which is not necessarily psychedelic, but it's another this genre, I would say, where we're starting to try to get changes in people's brain utilizing different pharmacologics, traditional medicine, herbal thing, whatever it might be in this area. So we know that there's benefit to many people. Okay, let's just say that. Because I like to say that. What do we know? We know that people are getting benefits. You're one of them. We know that in many of the people, the benefits are longer term. That's remarkable. And even this data, because I've seen people ask you, like, is there published research on this? Yes, Stanford has published research. I do not. But go search Stanford. You're going to have to do a little work on your own, little legwork. Stanford is publishing data on the use and the controlled use and the processing with the person. So for me, as just an individual, buying something on your own, going out in your backyard and doing it is not the way to be doing things. Because there's so much going on that we don't know. I think it's much better in a controlled environment. Vital signs are being maintained. You have people looking out for you, totally focused on your well-being. I think those are the ways people have to consider, if they're considering how they're going to try that. But so there's many different types, right? There's mushrooms, there's LSD microdosing. And again, I'm not an expert. There's ibogaine, there's all these ayahuasca. So I think that what I've talked with somebody in my field about, who's been doing it for more than 40 years, he said, what we'd like to know is what happens in the brain specifically by doing a brain map as one way, which is what we did, right? A brain map. By doing that pre and post, right? So there are bigger scanners we talked about, which we can find out what's going on. That would be a way. And I think whatever we can use to understand more of what's going on before and after, and taking care of that person carefully during their experience and helping them process it. So I'll open this up. So, I grew up in South Florida and I was a teenager and I did things. And my son said, Dad, when you did that, didn't you have like breakthroughs and experiences? And I said, no, I didn't. Why not? Because I was just a foolish young kid doing that. So I didn't have breakthroughs and great visions, and it was just foolishness on my side. That's not what I'm recommending. So if someone's going to do it and they're being cared for by a group like the group that you were working with, I mean, I thought that was brilliant. I think those men and women are really like, okay, let's do the right thing for these people. I think there's a lot there that we need to look into and continue to research, get data on so that we can better help people, even identify those before they do it that this may not work well for you. This may not be your best option. Because certainly in my mind, it's not like, oh, you're a special operator, you need to do psychedelics. That's not I don't think that. I think this may be a great option for you. And so let's get some data and let's build what we call a phenotype. Which types respond best to these types of interventions and which do not? And we can gather that kind of data, especially even now with coming AI, and that's a whole nother topic, but understanding who's going to be the best fit for that therapy, I think would be the next level of how to deliver the psychedelics in a very successful way for people so they can get the best out of that if they choose it.
Have you ever heard the way it was described to me, which is probably completely off after listening to you, is it does interrupt the default mode network, but the way I understood it is the default mode network kind of gets lazy after time, and it's just a highway of neurons going back and forth. And what I've heard is the psychedelics will throw a roadblock up, and then those neurons have to find new pathways or reopen old pathways, which is there any truth to that?
See, that's a great statement. So I would say, okay, let's look at data. How can we determine if we have new pathways? Well, if you did something like a tractography, like on the front of this kind of National Geographic, this is tractography. Now we can see, are we generating new pathways? Or we could look at a QEEG, like I showed you, and we can say, what was the connectivity before? And what is the connectivity? So I'll explain this when we talk about your map, is we can look at how these areas, all those points on the cap, represent different areas of the brain, and how they're talking to each other. And so we can have hyperconnectivity, too much. It would be like me standing next to you, like yelling in your ear. Your brain can just be screaming away. Or it can be hypoconnectivity, which is like it's not communicating very well at all between networks.
Okay.
And so then the question is, what did it do? Is it developing new synapses? I don't know about that. It might be.
What is a synapses?
Synapse is connection, basically, and I'm going to just make things simple. Connection between two neurons.
Okay.
They synapse. But there's around 80 billion neurons in your brain, and there's 3 times to 10 times the amount of synapses. So they connect all over each other. So if we're developing new highways, we're talking neuroplasticity.
Okay.
Right? So do psychedelics create neuroplasticity? I think you probably have people on both sides of the aisle for that.
Really? Interesting.
Do psychedelics benefit many people? Yes. Is it for everyone? Probably not. Let's determine who's going to benefit the most from it. That's the camp I land in, because it's not my expertise, but I'm open if it can help people. And does it create neuroplasticity? That's for the neuroscientists to determine based on data, right? You always have to have good intel. Is that the right language?
It is.
If you have poor intel, it doesn't go well. So if you have poor data, you can make all kinds of assumptions, but my dad would say it another way, which I won't. You're talking out of your south end. My dad had some colorful expressions. So, we have to have good data about the brain going in, doing it, coming out, so we can then correlate that and say, what does this mean really? Because we say a lot of things, and I've learned from my wife, words are very important, the way we say things. And I've learned in my years now, and I probably shouldn't have said it that way. So hopefully I'm choosing my words carefully to help people listening, is that there's benefit. You need to look into it. You need to find reputable people. You need to really, cross your T's and dot your I's and, really go into that like, okay, let me see if this is the right therapy for me. Because in a big metropolitan area like we live in, there's businesses. You know what I mean? So, great, sign you up, great, sign you up. And so we just have to be wise in how we're looking at that. But it's definitely has promise for a lot of people.
Okay.
Psychedelics, check.
Yeah, I want to get into the mapping in my brain after the break here, but before, since we're on kind of these non-traditional treatments, I'd like to ask you about marijuana. And the reason I'm asking is because I've used marijuana. It helped a lot with my anxiety. It's helped with sleep. It's helped with my overall mood. I never even considered it until my mid-30s. And the first time I did it, both night's sleep, anxiety, very low, if at all. And it did improve my overall mood. So now I've heard that there are negative effects to that as well, but I'd just like to get your opinion on what's happening there.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is an area again that I don't work in dispensing that. I grew up in South Florida during the age when all that stuff was happening. Meaning drugs and influx and all that stuff. Not that I was involved in that, but I grew up in the midst of that. So that kind of tainted a lot of my experiences back then. So what do we know? We know that whether it's CBD or whether it's oral consumption, or whether it's smoking, we know that there's benefit. We know there's benefit. What is it doing to the brain? That's where I always land, right? We know that it changes certain brainwave states. We also know that it can decrease motivation in younger men and the chronic use of it or the daily use of it. So we might be trying to get to something. So am I for it or against it? I think people have to make that decision. I think there's benefits, and you have to see if that's the right mechanism for you to use or right therapeutic to help you. And then be judicious enough where everything is being thrown at us in society, like do anything, take anything, is to understand first what's going on in my brain, and is that the best option for me? I think that's very important. So I'm not so old-fashioned that I would say, oh, we can't do any of that. Listen, there's benefits, and we're learning each day. Everything is advancing. It's becoming more sophisticated, the raising of it, the growing of it, the processing of marijuana and the use of it. I just like the more judicious use of it and the understanding of what's going on in a person's brain prior to whatever therapeutic they choose. Because if you don't know, okay, so it benefited you. I sleep better, I have less anxiety. Okay, is your tolerance going to go up? Are you going to have to smoke more? How much is that going to cost you? What else is that going to do to your brain? What is it going to do to you long term? Those are the questions that I'm also interested in. We need the short-term help for people, just like a medication. But we also need to understand more the long term. And can we get that person's brain to change on its own neuroplastically that they may not need that? Because the brain, we are so early in neuroscience right now. So early. Like probably what we're talking about now in 3 to 5 years will be like, we were doing that? So I think you're going to see such a radical change in the ability to restore or restorative therapies that are not based on pharmaceuticals, not based on a lot of chemistry, but are based more on other types, like transcranial magnetic stimulation, for instance. It's like, what? Which some of the operators and former military people get, where they're getting a high pulsing of magnetic stimulation, which actually creates neuroplasticity.
Really?
Yeah. So again, another topic we can chat about.
Are you aware of any long-term effects from marijuana use?
I think they're a bit varied depending on the age of the person, but they do change brain waves positively in the beginning and then negatively as it's long-term.
Really?
Yeah.
What is long-term?
What is long-term? I don't know. I don't know what their definition of that is. It's...
They don't say if that's a year, 6 months, 5 years.
No, I haven't seen data for that. I'm sure it's probably there if you dig into that, like what do they consider long-term? But then again, what did the person bring to the party? Are they someone dealing with just mild to moderate anxiety? Or is it somebody who has a military history with all of that trauma, physical brain trauma from injuries, rounds going off, all these high caliber, all that stuff coming together, toxin exposure, and they have anxiety. So those are two different people.
Okay.
So what's going to be chronic here? What's going to be chronic there? What's the dose they're going to need to get relief? What is that dose? That's a very unregulated area. That's part of the problem. It's like trial. Everyone's trying something to see what works. Which brand, which dose, how much, how often.
Okay.
So it's not an area that I could probably speak to as well as many.
All right. Well, let's take a quick break, and when we come back, I want to get into the mapping of my brain and find out if there's actually anything going on up here or not. Starting an e-commerce platform can be very intimidating, especially if you're not that tech savvy like me. And that is why I use Shopify. They make it super simple to start your e-commerce website. Let me tell you a little bit about it. Shopify is the commerce platform revolutionizing millions of businesses worldwide. Whether you're selling gummy bears or gummy bears, Shopify simplifies selling online and in person so you can focus on successfully growing your business. Shopify covers every sales channel, from an in-person POS system to an all-in-one e-commerce platform, even lets you sell across social media marketplaces. Packed with industry-leading tools ready to ignite your growth, Shopify gives you complete control over your business and your brand without having to learn any new skills in design or code. And thanks to 24/7 help and an extensive business course library, Shopify is there to support your success every step of the way. Now it's your turn to get serious about selling and try Shopify today. This possibility is powered by Shopify. Everyone knows what's going on around us. The banks are collapsing, the dollar's being devalued. You need to ask yourself one question. What are you doing to secure your family's financial future? The good news is we can protect ourselves by holding tangible assets like gold and silver. They've been known to hold their value, appreciate, and help provide a source of financial security that cannot be printed or taken away. I own gold, and I suggest you call my friends at Lear Capital. They offer a wide selection of gold and silver bullion coins, as well as IRA rollovers into precious metal-backed IRAs. Call Lear at 800-741-0551 to talk with a gold and silver specialist, or go to learshawn.com for the free gold and silver guides. There are a lot of gold companies to choose from. I particularly like Lear Capital because I trust them. Take action now to protect your financial future and your freedom. Call Lear at 800-741-0551 or go to learshawn.com, and my viewers receive up to $15,000 in free bonus medals with a qualified purchase. Call 800-741-0551 or go to learshawn.com. Information contained within Lear Capital's website is for general educational purposes and is not investment, tax, or legal advice. Past performance may not be indicative of future results. Consult with your tax attorney or financial professional before making an investment decision. All right, Doc, we're back from the break. Right before we started this podcast, you mapped my brain.
Right.
So what's going on up there?
All right. So definitely working at full capacity.
That's good.
We're looking at, as a model, the front of the brain here and the back of the brain towards me. And so I'm going to give you kind of a couple of thoughts in general, and then we'll dive down into, I'll explain what I saw in the results.
Okay.
So in general, well, it's important for people to know there's different kinds of brain waves, and the brain is always oscillating. All the brain waves. So what are the brain waves? Delta is the first one. Delta is normal for sleep. So we all have delta brain waves. It's for sleep. So when we're asleep, our delta waves will be a bit higher than some of the other brain waves. So it's a slow brain wave, as would be thought. Then you come up a little bit faster, you have theta. Theta is something where you're kind of dozing off, you're kind of drifting down into sleep. It's slowing your brain down, but it's not as slow as delta. Theta is also implicated in people. If you have a lot of theta brain wave in the middle of the day, you might have an attention problem because your brain's sluggish, it's slow, and it can't stay on things that are changing quickly. Theta can also be controlled by people who meditate. So it might be a good thing that you can bring up your theta. So it's a slow brain wave. So you have delta is very slow, theta is a little bit faster. Then you hit alpha. Alpha is like the gear shifter from slow wave to faster wave. And alpha is related to at least attributed to performance, a relaxed state of function where you can do what you need to do, but you're kind of in a good state, like a Zen state, or you're in the right zone for an athlete.
Okay.
Right? You're not tense, but you're not completely falling asleep, but you're mentally flexible, you're emotionally flexible. It's your alpha state. And even Tony Robbins, I believe, says that he trains for many hours to be able to stay in an alpha state because he's, leading these massive conferences and helping people have breakthroughs and things. So he's got to really be on his game.
Okay.
So alpha is very good. We know that alpha decreases as we age. And we can see that in people many times because they get less flexible, more rigid, more frustrated with things that maybe when they were younger, like, not a big deal. Then you go up from alpha to beta. And beta is a big, big range of brain waves. They have low beta and high beta. And so high beta is if you have to solve something complex. I mean, you have so much technology here, it's almost like my office. And you need to be at a bit of high beta learning how to operate all this stuff. That's normal. But when you close your eyes to relax, a person shouldn't be in high beta. That can be associated with stress, anxiety, things of that nature. So all the brain waves are normal. It depends on what the context is. So if I'm here talking to you, my brain is high in delta, that's not the proper context for that because it's for sleep. Or I'm trying to fall asleep and my brain has got a lot of high beta going on. I'm not going to fall asleep very well because my brain is racing. So all the brain waves, all the way to beta, and then the highest ones that we record are gamma. Gamma is a very high frequency processing brainwave, something that helps you have insight, embeds memories very deeply. So gamma, we know, is damaged with head injuries.
Okay.
And also with people with Alzheimer's. And actually, MIT did some studies years ago on mice, non-human studies. So not everything that's done in an animal model we know transfers to a human, but where they took a 40 hertz flickering light, and 40 hertz would be at like part of the gamma brainwave, and they're all in hertz measured. And a 40 hertz flickering light reduced a lot of the plaquing in the brains of the mice or rats that they used. So they thought, oh, wow, will a 40 hertz flickering light exposure to people with Alzheimer's and these different types of plaques improve them? So then, of course, many people jumped on that and started selling these lights that you could purchase and put in your desk that have 40 hertz flickering. And I bought one, curious. I put it just behind my computer. I think I got a headache the first day. Because I've had a number of head traumas. I estimate 5 to 7 concussions, playing football, track and field pole vaulting, several rollover car accidents. So I've had my fair share of head impact. Never diagnosed with a concussion, but I'm noticing now at my age, I think that's probably related to, like I sweat more on one side of my body than the other.
Really?
Yeah, that's related to a brainstem injury,
Okay.
I think. I mean, how injured am I? I'm not that injured. I'm pretty functional. But I'm noticing that I think these things are related to some of the head impacts I took. Being more stressed, a little more trouble sleeping, So I have little things that I notice, you know yourself. You notice like, that's not really what I used to be like.
So these frequencies, this alpha, beta, gamma,
Theta and delta.
So these are just, they're frequencies?
Yeah, they're electrical activity in your brain.
How are they damaged? How is a frequency damaged?
A frequency won't be damaged, but you can have too much of that brainwave or too little of that brainwave.
How?
Because of injury, number one, can change. Because you think about it, here's an electrical wiring network, electrochemical network, or you could even say electromagnetic, but electrochemical network, right? Everything's running over the wiring in this brain, and it's electrical frequencies, and you smash this brain from one side, or you twist it around, and that trauma can cause shearing of those electrical wires.
Okay.
And the shearing is what causes those wires not to transmit properly. And because it's injured, just like you get inflammation in a knee that was injured or a shoulder, you can get neuroinflammation. at that site of injury, which is going to radically change the electrical activity. And there's signatures, meaning we know that certain, or what I mentioned earlier, this word called phenotypes, meaning certain brainwave patterns are related to certain conditions. Then you find out, did this person have that condition? They did. Then that's the kind of pattern. So let me be a little more precise. A brain injury, a traumatic brain injury, has a signature often that has too much delta, that very slow wave, and too much high beta in two regional areas like, oh, there, and oh, there. That's very common. So when people come into our center and we do a brain map and they've had a head trauma, I look for signatures, patterns. Do they have a pattern of having a head injury? And in your case, here's what we see. You have a significant amount of delta wave. That's why I mentioned that. Too much.
Too much.
Too much delta wave on this side of your brain, the right side of your brain, into the temporal lobe, which has to do with memory. So it's running very slow, almost like here's the analogy I use. It's like having the brake on.
Okay.
Okay. And in your frontal lobe, you have too much high beta, which is like having the gas pedal pressed down. So you got the brake on and you got the gas pedal going. That's not so easy to get that car moving properly, right?
No.
You might be spinning the tires. I mean, just using that analogy. So that's the overview of what's happening. So it is a signature for a traumatic brain injury.
It is.
It is. Too much delta and too much high beta in local regions. What regions? Temporal lobe, frontal lobe. Too much high beta in the frontal lobe contributes to anxiety. No question. No question. Then we go back to what we were saying before. What's going to be the best therapeutic intervention for this person to start to heal, if possible, develop neuroplasticity, if possible, and abate their symptoms, help them feel better? That's the way I think about things. What can we do to improve the function of this person's brain so that they feel better and can carry on with their life in a contributing way, the way with their family, with work, with their health? Yeah, that's what I'm looking at.
So if that's what's going on with my brain and I went to your treatment center, what would be the next step?
Well, there's numerous other tests that we would use.
Okay.
To really dial in more data so that we can very precisely and specifically, as much as we can, target therapies. Okay. So let's go back to this. The right side of your brain, too much delta. So many of my therapies, for an example, might be from the left side of your body or from the left, through your left eye to drive more information into the right hemisphere. I may even use the vestibular apparatus in your inner ear on this side, which has to do with balance, because it has projections not only to balance, but to the frontal lobe, down to the brainstem, which is actually the expensive real estate. We need to analyze how the brainstem is functioning through special testing, because what we used to believe in brain injury is that it's up here, right? In a football helmet, where it hits here, or then it goes backward inside the helmet. Now we know that the head moves on a stalk, the brainstem. And that brainstem, when the head moves, it twists. And the torsion of that brainstem is what leads to many of the problems that we have: cardiac issues, respiratory issues, gut issues, blood flow back to the head issues, migraine headaches. So going back to that other person who tried psychedelics, who developed migraines, maybe the problem was in their default mode network because of the trauma, but maybe he had a problem in the brainstem that now boiled to the top because it needs a different therapy.
Okay.
And that's why we need better assessments on the front end so that the therapeutic intervention is more specific. I mean, can you get any more specific than being a special operator?
No.
The training is so precise, not general. So why don't we even think about that? Like, that's the way I kind of like to think in my non-military, is be as precise and target this thing so you can get the best outcome in the shortest time.
Okay.
That's the goal. It's not always easy to get there, but that's the goal. And people say, well, we want to have a proper hope when we're looking at people and what they're dealing with and how to help them restore. But they're in a way, there's always a hope. How can you say that? Because we don't know what the brain cannot do. So I like to come in setting the proper expectation with people, help them understand that there's something maybe that you can do, right? And so I say that because it's easy to lose hope. You try a million things, you're suffering so badly. We want to restore hope. There are things that can be done, and they may be able, and it may be multiple different things, but if they're targeted, you're going to get a better outcome.
Okay.
Yeah.
We kind of talked about this a little bit last night, but one of the reasons I've never gone to get a brain scan or anything, I've actually turned them down, is because I just always assumed, yep, I have a TBI, probably multiple TBIs.
Yeah.
And I've just had friend after friend, from my prior life telling me that they've got the brain scan and yes, all these things have happened, and then they don't know what to do. So they try the hyperbaric chamber, some other things. Does the hyperbaric chamber does that work for traumatic brain injury?
Out of Israel, they're finding dramatic results using hard chamber, hyperbaric oxygen therapy at certain depths, certain pressures, and finding dramatic change. We use a soft chamber. And what I would say is, so there are potentially benefits. Just like there's potentially benefits with psychedelics.
Okay.
There's potentially benefits with the use of marijuana that's properly dosed. So there's potential. What needs to be determined is what's the best fit based on what's going on in your brain. So again, go back to, okay, you entered the office. We're going to do a series of other assessments using your eye tracking, because eyes tell us dramatic things about the brain, like in the NFL, when they go into the tent, they look at how their eyes are moving. That's one of the standards for understanding if there's a brain injury. So we'll do eye tracking tests. We'll do balance and stability tests, standing on a foam cushion with your eyes closed, and people's balance gets very wobbly. And so we can measure that very carefully because it tells us about areas of the brain. Putting on special goggles to see how you do in the dark, how your eyes move, how your eyes function. Sometimes we'll put those goggles on somebody and they can't see anything, and one eye will just completely come in, like cross-eyed. So it's telling us, oh, there's neural networks here that are disrupted. We'll do autonomic testing for the brainstem. It's a specialized heart evaluation and blood flow, so we can know, is your brainstem operating properly? So as we start to separate all that data, we start to get a target.
These are all things that you perform?
Yes.
Okay.
And a proper examination. And so I would say that the people that do this kind of work are called, or at least most of them are called, functional neurologists. That's what I do. Functional neurology. And so that's what people would need to look for. Someone who works in functional neurology. Why? Because they're working with not only the data of what's going on in the brain from various sources like brain maps and things, but then what therapies can be now placed in order here, or what we like to say is stacked together. We use a suite of therapies. So we'll have people will call and say, I tried hyperbaric, it didn't help me. I tried vision therapy and it was a little bit helpful. But when you put it all together, it's very different.
What is going on with the hyperbaric chamber? Why is that working?
Pressure is the magic, right? Your body can only hold so much oxygen. If you ever put one of these little devices on, a pulse oximeter, you can see, 99. You can't take more than 100% oxygen into your body at atmospheric pressure. I mean, regular, what am I trying to say there? I lost my word.
Yeah.
Just at room air, 21%. You can't put more than 100% in. But under pressure, based on laws of physics, Boyle's law, you can dissolve oxygen into the plasma. So you can go way beyond 100% because it's not going on the red blood cells, it's going to all the plasma. Now it can get into areas that it may not have been able to get before.
That's why that works.
So pressure is the magic.
Okay.
And I'm going to say this, I'm going to quote a friend of mine. Oxygen is the essential nutrient. because people had questions on Patreon. What vitamins? And maybe we'll chat about that. It might be helpful. But oxygen is kind of a nutrient, right? Without oxygen, we're done. It's really the rate limiting nutrient. You can take the best of X, Y, Z, whatever. You might even be enjoying the gummy bears, which would be a good thing to enjoy. But you need oxygen. The brain needs oxygen, it needs glucose, and it needs activation.
Okay.
So the oxygen is really key to recovery, not only the brain, but everything in the body. And we know that longer term exposures to hyperbaric oxygen, even at low pressure, like the chamber we use, have dramatic benefits on even the cells of our body. Longevity mechanisms start kicking in. So some of these other, we won't go into the nomenclature, but you have different genes that start getting stimulated, and those are going to be better for longevity. But you have to have a certain amount of time under pressure. So hyperbaric is a very beneficial therapy when it's put together in the right order with things. Let me use an analogy, what I mean by order or stacking therapies, just to hit it right now. If you and I go to the gym and we work on bench press, and that's all we do, that's not bad. We'll feel it in our chest. But if we did bench press and we did flies and we did 2 other exercises for chest, we're going to feel it a lot more. We stack together different things.
Okay.
So by assessing the whole person in this way, their brain and how everything that inputs to the brain, we may use different therapies to get more of an uptick in that brain's ability to develop plasticity. So if I just did vision therapy with you, could be really good. And then let's say I did 2 or 3 other therapies and you're like, wow, doc, I'm really like fatigued. My brain is fatigued. It was demanding. Now I'm going to put you in the hyperbaric chamber and I'm going to give you such a dose of oxygen, I'm going to help you to recover faster. That's the method that we use often.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so we're going to exercise the brain in a way of saying it. We're going to push it and push it and push it properly within its metabolic capacity. I'm not going to push a person too hard. And that's my expertise, is like knowing when. And then get them in the oxygen. Does everyone do hyperbaric? No, but a large percentage do.
I talked with a lot of people with TBIs here. Where would be the first? What is the best treatment in your opinion of everything that you've heard of, hyperbaric, psychedelics, the light therapy, the magnetic stuff that you were just talking about earlier? Is there something that you've found have a lot more positive results?
That is a tough question. And the reason that's a tough question is because it depends on the person and what's going on with them. That's why that's a tough question to answer.
Okay.
Because people will hear that and they'll say, that's what I need to try then. And it may fall flat for them because it wasn't really delivered properly, or it was delivered properly, but it wasn't really the thing they needed.
Okay.
So I would say, I like to go back to, what do we know? We know that there's benefits to TMS, transcranial magnetic stimulation. We know there's benefits to hyperbaric. We know that psychedelics have benefits for some people, and other various and sundry things, vision therapy, other brain training has benefit, but we have to figure out where you are so we can suggest the proper thing so you get the best outcome.
Okay. I'd like to move into anxiety, ADHD, and dementia, Alzheimer's. And the reason these are 3 things that I think a lot of people have concerns of, and so I kind of want to go through each one and talk about what's going on with the brain with these, and are there any natural remedies? Because ever since COVID there's been this big push of people looking for natural remedies and not using big pharma anymore. And so I'd like to incorporate some of that. But let's just start with anxiety. What's going on there?
Anxiety. Well, we talked about that default mode network earlier. And the default mode network is regions of the brain that operate together. And it's like where you step back and you have this hope for your future and a sense of self and kind of being able to pause and relax and step back. So first thing we think about with anxiety is, what do the brain waves look like? Are their brain waves too much in the high beta? And if they're too much in the high beta, then they're not going to be able to relax. So let's say that's part of sometimes people with anxiety. It's very common, very common. Way too much high beta, whether it's in the frontal lobe, like we talked about, whether it's in the emotional cortex of the brain, which is the limbic area, which is right here. Way too much high beta in this area. Or that default mode network is disrupted, and so that's not letting their brain relax. I'm trying to get that back together. So there's not an area that we can say memory is primarily in that temporal lobe, but we can't say, oh, anxiety is just there. Because different people present differently. Some people it's emanating from the frontal lobe. Some people it's emanating in the cingulate, that limbic area inside. Some people it's emanating because this thing back here, the cerebellum in the back of my brain, which is for coordination of things, is not firing properly to the front. So that's how complex it is, right? I mean, it's said the brain is the body's most complex organ. Mm-hmm. So there's a certain level I want to try to help things become like, oh, I get what he's saying, but some of it is complicated. It's not just so easy to say, oh, and that's what, unfortunately, I think we've done a lot in healthcare. Oh, you have anxiety. Here you go. And it's a chemistry approach. So, I mean, modern psychiatry, a lot of them, Dr. Daniel Amen for one, and many others are saying, we're behind because we're treating everything like it's a chemistry issue. Because that was the thought, that it's always a chemical imbalance.
Okay.
But now we realize, oh, maybe it's not necessarily a chemical imbalance. Maybe it's an imbalance in the firing of that brain. Because when neurons fire together electrically, they create chemistry. It's not the other way around. It's not like all of a sudden chemistry just starts being produced. It's like the brain's firing or not firing, and it's producing chemistry or not producing chemistry. Our approach in the past, meaning healthcare, has been, let's use a chemical approach. And why? Why have we used that? I don't know. Is it because of, it's ways to research and funding? I mean, probably, right? We know big pharma. It's money. There's a lot of money involved. There's people trying to help. There's scientists. There's academics. But there's money, big money involved. So who's to say? But anxiety can be different areas of the brain that have very high brain waves that are overactive, and from a brain standpoint, and then we want to look at how do we get inhibition? How do we get the brain to start shutting that down? Is it talk therapy, which can help bring out some of the issues maybe that drove the anxiety, separation anxiety for people? Dr. Russell Kennedy says that. He says it's an alarm in your body going off, usually from separation anxiety. So different schools of thought and different domains of science have different reasons as to why there's an anxiety.
Okay.
They would say. So a psychologist would explain it one way, and a psychiatrist perhaps a little bit differently. Someone who does mind-body medicine might explain it a little differently. But what I'm saying is, okay, we have oftentimes high beta in certain areas of the brain, and the goal is, whatever therapy, how can we bring that under control? And I think it's usually a multi-disciplined approach works best. Because what's the alternative? Versus, take this. Some of the most addictive medications we have are benzodiazepines, anti-anxiety meds. I mean, and there's people that say, we really don't want you to take these. But when someone's in a panic state, okay, we get it. We know there's a need, and it's helpful, and we're thankful. But can it be misused and abused? Of course it can. So we want to dial it back, figure out what's going on in their brain, and see what other kind of solutions. And we have children under 12 with severe anxiety. Can you imagine? Severe, cannot function. I mean, this breaks my heart. Yeah, I mean, little children, teenagers. That's what I was mentioning last night. The one thing that gets me more than anything is the young people, and they're, because of some of these mood disorders like anxiety, just wrecking them. And then what's the cause? Many things. The outward environment, the inward environment, the brain environment, all these contributing factors. It's a big task to try to help people recover. Does that kind of help with anxiety?
It does. Is there anything that people can do naturally to lower anxiety?
Yeah, so the brain creates many neurotransmitters, neuromodulatory transmitters. The brain creates a lot of chemistry for itself. Serotonin, dopamine, I mentioned those earlier, acetylcholine, that's really involved with memory. But GABA, G-A-B-A, which stands for a certain longer name, people can Google that. GABA is one that your brain makes. And GABA is the only one that's the inhibitory, calms you down. So people have used GABA, which you can buy over the counter. It's just a very simple supplement. And you get some, because it has to go through your gut and be broken down and then through the liver and then be absorbed and then be converted. So it's quite a process. But some people find that using GABA is very helpful for things like anxiety, for things like sleep disruption and muscle stiffness. Why? Because GABAergic drugs are used for sleep, anxiety, and muscle stiffness. So GABA can be something as a simple trial that someone could use. It's safe, it's non-toxic, it's water soluble, so you're not going to store up all this. And you might notice a change with that. And I usually dose it up with my clients to see if they're getting a change. It's not one of those things you need to try for 6 months.
Okay.
You're going to know in a week or it's not for you.
That was what I was going to ask. How long does it need to be in your system before you start to see effects?
And I dose people up. We might start at, for example, and this is not medical advice for people, I might start with 200 milligrams and go to 400, and you don't notice anything, and then 600, and then 800. Because most of the times you see it in the store, it's 750 milligrams to 1,000. So, you can start on a lower dose and try it and notice. And when would you take it? If you're having trouble sleeping, you take it in the evening. If you're having anxiety through the day, and that's really your suffering point, maybe you're starting it earlier in your day. So it's a simple, non-toxic, relatively safe trial, short-term, seeing, does it help me or not? And if it doesn't, that's not the thing for them. The other thing a lot of people use, and we use it very successfully, is CBD. That helps a lot of people with anxiety. Not everybody, but a lot of people.
Okay.
And then there's something that I have no disclosure. I don't sell them. There's something, two little they look like wristwatches, and they're called touch points. Touch points.
Are these the things, the metal bands with the little balls on the end?
No, from acupuncture, there's some things I think like that.
Okay.
These vibrate back and forth, bzz, 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 back and forth, and you just turn them on, click them on. And you can put them here, or you can put them on your ankles. You can clip it on, and it's been very effective in helping people with anxiety.
Why?
Because it operates through a sensory mechanism into the brain, and it's going to lower the threshold of that high beta. I was going to bring them, but I brought other tech just to see. Because why? It's a low-cost device that's very helpful for, just so many people, and you can buy it off the internet. So, and we use that with a lot of the kids. We also use it with adults. But when you have a kid that's on these medications that are very addictive, and the parents would rather have an option. And so we tried that, and I'm like, wow, those things are the greatest thing. Now they can, and we use the same kind of device many times for people who have attention problems, because attention problems can have too much of a certain brainwave. And if we can kind of disrupt that elevated brainwave or alter it, we may get them to be able to keep their attention longer. And then if you can keep your attention longer, or you can lower your anxiety, now you can train your brain at that level and strengthen it.
What are these things called?
Touch points.
I'm getting some.
You should. I definitely recommend it. They're not expensive at all, and they're worth a try.
Okay.
They're worth a try.
I'm definitely going to try those. Let's move into ADHD.
Yep.
So I grew up, I got diagnosed with that, I believe in 4th grade. Couldn't stand it. Hated taking the meds. Used to throw them out the window on the way to school because I didn't want to be different than anybody else. And now it's becoming, at least it appears to me that it's becoming so common. I think that more people say they have ADD, ADHD than don't have it now. And why is that? Why can't anybody hold a thought anymore?
Yeah, why? Why? I think there's probably a lot of reasons. We're talking about a younger generation. We're talking about the more current, the 20s to 30s.
Sure.
Or 18s to 30s. Part of it, what I have gathered in reading some books, there's a great book called Dopamine Nation, written by a psychiatrist out of Stanford. Again, I keep referring to Stanford. I didn't go there. I'm not part of their donation fund or whatever they have, but there's some excellent researchers there. So I like to understand things from their side who are working in the lab. I'm working with people, they're working in labs. So I get to see that data and say, can we use that? And that's where what we call clinical neuroscience. We're taking neuroscience out of there and using it in the clinic right now, because it could take 20 years before that data is now being used in a therapy. We're trying to extract it safely, non-invasive therapies, and say, let's try it right now. It's not trying dangerous things, there's safe things, but we're applying the principles of what they're doing there in the center.
You personally are doing that, or
Yeah.
neurology?
Functional neurologists.
Functional neurologists across the country are doing this, or just your?
No, they're across the country, across the world.
Okay.
We have a network all over the world that have been trained and utilize a lot of these principles. So going back to that, Dopamine Nation, it's a very interesting book. Adderall, in one of the first stories, the guy talks about, like, this helped me perform. And that's, I think, one of the things is, help me perform. Mm-hmm. How can I perform better, either in a social situation, in a work situation, whatever it is? How can I perform better, right? We all want to perform better, but these things have become so accessible. This is my opinion now. These medications, drugs have become so accessible that everyone goes to them, all the young people, a lot of young people. So much so, perhaps you know this, that's one of the things that they buy from each other. They have a prescription. I'm going to sell my Adderall prescription to somebody, or my benzo prescription. So that's where we are.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, truth be told, I'm one of them. I did that. I sporadically took Adderall and Ritalin growing up. Then I joined the military, didn't take it at all. Every once in a while for an operation, they would give us some Provisual or some Adderall or something if it was going to be a long night or a couple days. But I didn't start taking it on a regular basis again until I started business. And it did help. It did help with functionality, and it helped me be more productive. It also dramatically increased my irritability and anxiety. Yeah. And so I quit taking them, and I would take it sporadically. Then I did the psychedelic thing, and I haven't taken them again since. It's been almost a year now, but that's kind of, I'm just telling you this. Yeah. So yeah,
it's a reality. That's kind of where we are. So we need to have other options, or it would be nice to have other options. Again, going back to what's going on in their brain. So here, what's so fascinating, what you told me, is that when I was in 4th grade, I had diagnosed with this. Then I became an operator, and then I had concussions. And you see how one thing layers on top of other things? So we know that someone who has ADHD, we know this in the literature, or a woman at a certain point in her cycle or menstrual cycle, or someone with anxiety that has a concussion will have a less better outcome than someone who didn't have that. Because it's more complicating. The brain has already been dealing with something.
Okay.
Right? It's like what you brought to the party. I didn't bring a normal, typical brain. I brought a brain that was dealing with ADHD, which may have been too much activity of high beta or too much theta activity. So that's why we have to understand brain mapping and do these cognoscopies every year. Doing the least expensive, least invasive approaches to understanding the brain every year. Like the old physicals that people used to do back in the day. I do a yearly physical. What about a brain evaluation every year? That's low tech, or not low tech, high tech, but non-invasive, low cost. And someone to interpret it. Then you know where you are. Mm-hmm. What if you have a rough year and your brain is really going on a certain direction, and you can do things more naturally to taper that and bring it back into balance? So that is part of the problem, is that the attentional networks of the brain are imbalanced. It could be too much, it could be too little. That's why one-size therapy doesn't fit all. It does not.
You work a lot with ADHD patients, correct?
A lot of young people.
What kind of stuff do you do for them?
What do we do for them? Well, one tool we use with them, so we may use neurofeedback, which is, after a brain mapping, we may use a type of training where they're getting feedback about how their brain is doing, and they have to alter it themselves. So they learn how to self-regulate or auto-regulate. That's one therapy. We look at how their eyes track. say, well, they didn't have a brain injury, but how the eyes track tell us about how certain areas of the brain are working. So I might use visual tracking exercises to stabilize an area of their brain, just like I would with concussion. I may use something called brain tap, which is another device. I may use those touch points with them. And so sometimes we need to send things home with people often so that they have a daily dosing of themselves, that I can be, partnered with them, whether it's this low tech, like the touch points. I'm going to have you wearing that every day during homework. So Dr. Andrew Huberman, again, to go back to Stanford, says something interesting. A lot of his colleagues there, researchers, and have children and young people, and they were talking about the use of Adderall for attention. Nobody's really, I think, a fan of it as a parent. They would rather have another option, but it does work to some degree with these young people. But he was saying maybe, and I'm paraphrasing weakly, if the person, is it bad for them to be on a medication when they're doing some kind of therapy? And the answer may not be so bad, because if their brain is in a better working order, I may be able to train it better. But if they're all over the map here, I may not even be able to get them to focus on what I need them to do.
Okay.
There's logic in that. As long as there's a rationale for me, like, tell me the rationale as to why you want to do that. Okay, that makes sense. But if there's no rationale, it's just like, throwing a dart at something, that I'm not in favor of. So we don't love medication. We know that it's necessary. It does help to some degree. It's got other effects that we don't love. So we want to train the brain. So we want to get the brain understood of that young person or adult. Then we want to develop a strategy, if possible, and start delivering that to them, whether it's things they do on their own, whether it's supplements, whether it's training an area of your brain that has too much imbalanced brainwave through different therapies, even like visual tracking. I mean, the level of therapies and the application of them are things you can't even imagine. So when someone says, tell me what therapies you do, it's like, I always sit back and say, wow, how am I going to explain this? Tell me all the gear that you carry as an operator. First of all, I have no idea of any of it.
Good analogy.
And now you're going to explain it to me? I don't even know what you're talking about. I never understand when you have people on it and they're saying these different acronyms. I'm like, I had to look up MARSOC. I had to look up all these things. I have like no idea. So that's how complicated some of the therapies, they're all integrated. But they use the things, here's the best way to say it. Okay, I'll slow myself down. We use things to change the brain that are inputs to the brain. Visual inputs, hearing inputs, taste inputs, smell inputs, physical inputs from the body, right? If I do electrical stimulation on this wrist, I know for certain it's going to end up in the left side of your brain. It's also going to go through the brainstem. It's going to activate things, and it's going to bring up acetylcholine in your brain. Your arousal system is going to come up, So I can do that with someone who's in a low state of arousal. And I did that with somebody who was in a very deep state of seizure. And this is in literature. I didn't develop it. They use stimulation on the median nerve, and it's in studies that people can look up on PubMed, the National Library of Medicine, to bring people out of coma state. So there are some really unique things that can be applied. You just have to have someone who has a background like myself and my colleagues that can say, what might work here? And then we test something that's non-invasive and non-threatening to the patient, of course. We'd never do that. Does it have a good outcome? Yes. Okay, now we're going to repeat that until we strengthen that neural connection. Now we're going to change it. So we're constantly testing things to see, is that the right thing? And if it is, I'm going to ride it until that area is stronger.
Interesting.
Right?
As far as natural remedies, you kind of talked about it when we were going over anxiety, but is there anything that somebody that's having focus problems or that has been diagnosed with ADD, ADHD that they can do naturally?
Yeah, so we haven't really landed on this area about nutrition and that part and lifestyle, but let's just kind of like put a little kind of covering onto that because I think it fits here.
Okay.
So natural remedies. I like to ask people, so I'm in this 33 years. I always love the shiny new thing. What's the new supplement? What's the new technology? I love this kind of stuff. So my wife holds me back the reins. She holds back the reins. You have enough technology, honey. Okay, so with that background, just an homage to my wonderful wife, and I'm thankful for that. I go back to the basics. What should I take? What should I do? Tell me about your sleep. I sleep terrible. Okay, so I need to work on sleep. Good sleep is a cornerstone, a foundation to a healthy brain. Good. Tell me what your diet's like. It's terrible. Okay. A good diet is foundational to a healthy brain. Tell me about your family life, stress level, things like that. I'm super stressed out with my work. So there's 3 things there that don't cost them anything, that if we could start putting together lifestyle things with that, it would make a big change in their brain. And they may be related to changing the nutritional approach. I'm not saying it's going to be easy. Right? I mean, there's things like if you put a bag of chips, a bowl of chips here, I can't stop myself. I mean, I'm into the chips the whole time. So we all have our thing. So I'm not saying it's easy, but we know, listen, I got a problem and I'm going to have to nail this thing down if I want a better outcome. Because everyone says, I'm willing to do anything until you touch the thing they don't want to do. And then like, oh, that's what I got to do. But that's the important things many times. So we got to get their diet. If that's a big problem, we got to get that more balanced out. And it may be steps, short, small steps, incremental steps. Maybe need to remove some things, may need to add some things just to have a proper balanced nutritional intake. That's very important.
Okay.
You know.
So are you saying just a well-balanced diet overall?
Well,
or is there anything specific?
Yeah.
And so I'll let you answer that, then I got another question.
Well, I think that's even become difficult to answer because now people have, I mean, it's like everybody got to their sides, right? It's like you got the plant-based over here, you got the meat-eating, the carnivores over there. You got, the beauty is that our body can adapt to so many things. And so we have to determine where are you and what do we need to alter that's going to help you. So I'm just going to use you and I. Let's say that you're plant-based. No, I don't even want to go into that. That's just too much controversy in that. Let's just say that you eat a lot of dairy. You love cheese. You drink milk. You eat a lot of dairy. You have a lot of digestive problems. Just an example. A lot of digestive problems. We want to help your brain. I may make a suggestion. I say, Shawn, why don't we start to taper back some of the dairy? So that it's not every day and it's not in this, you drink 2 glasses of milk a day and you eat cheese every day, which you love, which is like locally, and I love cheese, there's nothing wrong with cheese. And you like ice cream in the evening and you make your own ice cream. Okay, those are all good things, but maybe it's a little too much dairy. Maybe. For you, because we're trying to restore brain function. Maybe. And you have gut problems. You see how I kind of put that together? Mm-hmm. So, or maybe it's like, man, I love bread. And maybe you have a little bit of and you have gut issues and you have brain issues. Maybe there's a bit of gluten. We need to taper it down. So we're reasonable. We're not saying stop everything. Reasonable. How do we taper this down if that might be a contributing factor? Now we can do testing on those things to see if you have sensitivities and things like that, but it's just as easy to start balancing out your diet. More whole-based foods.
Okay.
If you're eating meat, cleaner meats. Right?
Cleaner meats.
Things that are less processed, less all the different aspects of what we know is a problem, less toxins, less GMO. We want to reduce many of those things. If a person they're trying to clean up their diet because it may be affecting their brain. Sure, that makes sense. It's reasonable. Put better gas in your car. Change the oil more frequently. That makes sense. That's so simple. So we want to clean up, but not everyone understands what cleaning up the diet means. So we need to cut down on some of especially sugars or carbohydrates, because that really can create problems with the brain, too many carbohydrates, like a lot of things. So we talked about just general nutrition. That's what I mean when I say cleaning up the nutrition. It's got to be, again, a little more specific to the person.
Okay. The follow-up question to that is, there's all these supplements. Onnit has one called, I can't remember what, but it's a brain function thing, ginkgo biloba. Now, as psychedelic medicine is coming more and more to the forefront, all these companies are talking about fungi and the benefits of non-psychedelic mushrooms like lion's mane and all this. Is this real? Are there real benefits to all these fungi?
It's definitely real. Yeah, I was using lion's mane for a while. We use it with some of our clients. We don't use it with everyone. But these things are real, and there's data. And someone might email you, say, well, where's the research? I'm not going to get the research for you. You have to look for scientific articles. It's all in the National Library of Medicine. That's where I recommend people go. You just Google PubMed. That's the National Library of Medicine, where more than 8,000 articles a day are uploaded, scientific articles. And you can usually find things for and against whatever you're looking for. But then you got to be discerning and say, what's going on here? And then maybe take that and talk to somebody. Everything is about decision making. That's the brain. What's best for me? But as an idea, yes, there's benefits to things like ginkgo and lion's mane and fish oils, omegas, and you just go down the list. Vitamin D. That's not really for the brain. Yes, it is. It does affect the brain if you have low vitamin D levels. It affects every cell in the human body, vitamin D, because it's something that works on the nucleus of the cell. So there's so many, you want to have those things in balance. Some blood work, specialized blood work can tell you where you might be out of balance, looked at by someone who understands that in functional medicine. And then and that's where that language is being used in a lot of domains. Functional trainers, functional medicine, functional neurology, because we're looking at how the operation is rather than, and trying to redefine that, right? Trying to redefine that for people. It's not just, or how many times do you know people, yeah, they looked at my blood work, said everything's fine. Is it? Because we use different standards. Functional medicine, the international organization, uses standards that are a little bit more narrow. So we can see if your body is starting to trend high or low before it gets to a problem. And fix that through supplementation, adding or removing something, or changing, altering. So diet is really crucial to a healthy brain. There's different approaches to that. It should be specialized to the person based on what they're doing at that point and what they need to alter. And my wife and I work with people on that very much because it's integral. It's what you're doing every day. It's how you're restoring or not restoring.
Interesting. Now I'm wondering what I don't know. And so I take a mushroom supplement, I take multivitamin, I take greens. Are there any supplements that maybe haven't hit the mainstream that you think people need to be aware of?
Good question. Yes, but I hesitate on saying that to people because, I think they're too specialized. I don't think everyone needs them. And that's what happens. You say something and everyone jumps on that. Mm-hmm. And then 70 people are trying it and 70 people are saying, how could you possibly say that? I'll mention to you off camera later, like some of the things I do. But some of the things that I do, which I definitely would recommend, is the multivitamin, the greens, the omega supplement, omega 3s. It's really crucial. I take something on and off called quercetin. Quercetin, which is a bioflavonoid. It helps my body process things. It's an antioxidant. Do I take it every day? I don't. I cycle through. And I started taking something called NMN. NMN. It stands for something.
November, Mike, November.
That's what I needed to know, and I didn't know the proper nomenclature, so I didn't want to be a fool and say that. Yes, November, Mike, November. Okay, so it's a precursor to something called NAD. So a lot of people are doing IV vitamins now. I'm sure you've heard about that. Glutathione and NAD and all these things. We do not supply that in our center, but it's recommended for a lot of people to do those things. High vitamin C doses. Actually, we did that to help our immune systems through the last couple of years. My wife and I had done that intermittently, a handful of times. But this NMN is the precursor to NAD. NAD is made by our body, and it helps with energy production in the body, ATP production. So I recently started adding that as recommended by Dr. Sinclair out of Harvard to add that to my regime. I'm 59, almost 60. So I'm trying to manage some of these things that we know decline as you age. Your testosterone declines, your ability to produce ATP declines, right? Your collagen production declines. So yeah, that's something I've been working on lately. I don't notice a lot, and I coach people. They say, well, I didn't notice a change. Some things you're not going to notice. You just know that I'm just ensuring I'm plugging the holes in my nutrition by doing these things. That's what we're doing.
Okay.
And other things you will notice, like GABA. You should notice it or you don't need to stay on it. So some of these things, the omegas, the multivitamin, women should be on multivitamins. We know that. Why? And men. Because their telomeres, the end of their DNA, breaks down faster when they're under stress. And they found with multivitamin, University of California, San Francisco, a simple multivitamin started to increase the telomere capping of these DNA so their strands wouldn't break down so fast. So multivitamin, probably a good idea.
Interesting.
Probably not one you buy in your local, cheapy. I never go cheapy, and you don't need the most expensive.
Okay.
As a general rule of thumb, right? You don't need to spend $1 bazillion on supplements, and don't buy the cheapest thing for $2 off of whatever, because you don't know how they're made all the time. And so just be diligent or vigilant.
Okay.
That's the right word.
Let's move into dementia and Alzheimer's there. What causes that?
So we used to think, we being at large people in brain health, that it was plaques that develop. First, actually years ago, they thought it was aluminum from
It's
deodorant.
not aluminum.
Not really.
That's good to know.
But toxins are not good.
Because we tried that other deodorant, and I'm not
Didn't work.
I'm not doing it.
Yeah, so it's not aluminum. Does that mean that you should use aluminum chlorohydrate deodorant? I mean, toxins are toxins. So if you can mitigate that, reduce those in your life, in your lifestyle, good idea. So it's not aluminum building up in your brain, number one. Then it's these different types of plaques and tangles. But rather than going into the pathophysiology, the real details of that, one of the things that is really key to reducing your incidence of developing Alzheimer's, which is more prevalent in women than men, which is really a terrible disorder that you just don't know anything around you eventually, is blood sugar control. So Dr. Dr. Bredesen out of UCLA, I mentioned him earlier, he wrote a book on reversing Alzheimer's. And there's many different things in there, from stress reduction to diet, to things that help, that you can do as a person. But they are, in an unofficial way, saying in the literature, type 3 diabetes is early Alzheimer's. Meaning, when your blood sugar is out of control for many years, it creates an inflammatory state in the brain. So we got to control our blood sugar. And when you walk around, I just heard a pediatrician the other day on a certain radio network explaining the level of obesity in children and young children, skyrocketing like 20% of the population. And the overweight was over 50%. So you have obese and you have overweight, right? Over 50% of kids and teenagers.
Oh, man.
So, I mean, we got a big problem with obesity in this country, from food supplies types to overeating to many things. But it's a problem. And that's creating not only body image issues, but all types of internal issues. I know years ago, and I'm not going to quote it exactly, but we have on our top diseases that take people out, we have more self-induced ones. That's really where we are as a developed nation, right? Heart disease, stroke, things that people do in their lifestyle that contributes to them. So we know that. That's not, new. But yeah, we really want to learn to control our blood sugar. So looking at blood work, maybe once a year, and these particular measures, not only your glucose, but your A1C, which is, you'll see it on commercials all the time now. And recently, my wife and I were watching, we don't watch a lot of TV, but on occasion, the drug commercials are on there, pharmaceuticals, and they were saying how this drug in particular will alter this, which will affect your brain. We've never heard that before. So it's becoming more apparent and more in the culture, the issues of the brain and neuroscience, right? Usually people perk up when they're like, oh, the brain, my brain? Tell me about that. So certain medications which affect your drive for your appetite also affect things in your brain, which is where your drive comes from for hunger and thirst and libido and satiety and all these things. So we got to control the blood sugar. You want to reduce your chance of Alzheimer's? Control your blood sugar. That is definitely my recommendation. There are other things, but if you don't get that right, I think you really are going to increase your odds that if you have the genetic markers, like women do, that can be tested, and you have a higher tendency for that, and you have a blood sugar problem, you're going in that direction.
Okay.
Right? We do know that people who sustain concussions, even one, have a higher incidence of Parkinson's, dementia, and Alzheimer's.
Okay.
From brain injury, which creates inflammation, which damages tissue in the brain, which then doesn't make it work as well. So in an oversimplified way, that can happen. That's why we need to understand what's going on in the brain and try to develop therapeutic interventions, whether it's natural things or whether it's pharmaceuticals or whether it's therapies or whether it's oxygen or what have you, to improve the health of that brain. Because, I mean, my dad had dementia. He had a severe head-on collision in the 70s down in the Keys and was in ICU for like a week. Wasn't supposed to survive, but survived and had a difficult time after that through life. And I always thought, I didn't know anything growing up. I thought it was because he had a difficult upbringing and it was really harsh and those types of things. But later I realized that was because my dad had a really severe brain injury. That's why he had the emotional swings. That's why he had early dementia. That's why he had those things. That's why he had the mood swings. That's why there was substances used. Because my dad had a severe brain injury. Oh. So I got to watch the whole course of that. Wow. I lived with him, of course. He was a good guy. He did the best he could. Now I understand better, right? Hindsight is 20/20. Now, and then I got to see him pass. Going through that, just not. I remember one time I was trying to make him toast. And I was like, Dad, you know what this is? I know, but I can't think of the word. And you know what this is? The bread in the toaster? I just can't think of the word, but that was that process of losing the ability to know what things were. It was rough.
Remember my first question in the show was short-term memory loss, forgetting what you're saying in the middle of saying it. Are those signs of early set Alzheimer's by chance?
I would say they're signs of a working memory problem.
Okay.
But I wouldn't go as far as say those are early signs of Alzheimer's.
Okay. A lot of people think that doing crossword puzzles or Sudoku or math problems or any types of these brain exercises is going to help reduce their chances of dementia, Alzheimer's. Is there any truth to that? Maybe
that much.
That much, okay.
I mean, someone else might argue the point. This is my opinion, so time out. My opinion is those things can be good. Learning a new language, yes. Whenever you put yourself into a brand new environment to learn, like you are not an expert at all, right? So like I told you, my wife and I learning about firearms recently, I knew nothing. So I'm putting myself in an environment where I know nothing. My brain has got to light up and work to be taught on how to do this. That is excellent for the brain. Like you went into all of this. That was dramatically helpful for you, I would say, in my opinion. Like, this is not my understanding, my wheelhouse, but you learned it all. I think that was brilliant on your side. And the more hours you put in learning like something brand new, going from novice, down, your brain can really go through changes. So that would be great. The other more passive therapies, Sudoku, crossword puzzles, things like that, have benefit. But you know what has more benefit than those? Exercise. There's more research that exercise and moving the body improves brain function than all that other stuff stacked together.
Wow, really?
Yes.
Okay.
What's the biggest input to the human brain? The body. It's attached. You feel things everywhere, that's input. You sense things, pressure, touch, pain, temperature, all that is input, constantly going into the brain. So if we can activate that, we're going to activate so much more of the brain. So when they put someone who's elderly with maybe early dementia in a chair and they sit there and there's no stimulation, yes, they're going to deteriorate very fast. But movement can start to activate the brain more than just reading something on a page. So I like movement. It doesn't have to be, gym exercise. It's got to be movement. And it has all different types of concomitants. It can be yoga movements. Those positions affect different. I have a picture in our office on the wall of how different types of exercise affect different brain regions. So exercise would be something I want everyone to be moving safely, especially if they're elderly, safely, being monitored carefully, and then developing what's the best for them that's going to help them. Maybe if they can't move very much because they're older, maybe it's isometrics. Remember those? Isometrics don't change the joint position, so you're very low likely to get injured, but you stimulate things. And by firing pathways like that, you start to get more activity. So my dad, just as an example, became nonverbal in a bed within a month. And they said, this is his condition, Mr. Bagnell. And my wife and I were like, this is not his condition. This is because of lack of stimulation, over medication, you put him in a bed. So we got some physical therapy going. Would you believe he was sitting up and talking?
Wow.
Within a week?
Are you serious?
Tossing a ball, moving his arms. Yeah. Like it wasn't clear because he was still having with his dementia, but he was communicating. Yes. Dad, you want me to push you around? You know, he could communicate. Before he was like this, and they're telling me. So movement activates the brain very dramatically. Now, if someone has anxiety, they don't want to do high intensity intervals. Maybe they want to do yoga. And I'm not a yoga instructor or anything like that, but I pushed back for years against my wife with yoga. No, that's not my thing. I like weights. I like running and sprinting and higher intensity. But when I did yoga, I realized, oh, that's what I need, because it calmed my brain down, slowed me down. And we know that certain types of yoga positions and maintaining them, not only the flexibility and all that stuff, can actually lower the threshold in the amygdala, which has a lot to do with your fear response and stress response. So, like, I realized, oh, that's what I really need. But we like to do what we're good at. And maybe we need to recalibrate that and say, maybe I need to do things I'm not so good at, because that's going to help my brain, probably going to be better for my overall development.
That's fascinating. So also, just rewind them real quick. So learning, you know, it doesn't have to be reading, Sudoku, crossword puzzles, all that kind of stuff. You could be going out and learning how to shoot. It could be new hobbies, learning how to water ski, learning how to, I don't know, whatever.
If you link movement, and again, I'm going to quote Dr. Huberman, that movement is the doorway into neuroplasticity. So here's an example of what we do in the office sometimes. We have a timing program on a computer where we put a sensor on the hand or a mat on the floor, and a person may have to clap to this timing that they hear. So it's just a simple cowbell, you know, like the Moore cowbell. And they're listening to it and they have to time that and they have to clap. And I'll get them working through several sets of that, whether it's right hand on the thigh, stepping with the left foot, different combinations that require a little bit of coordination. Mm-hmm. And then I'll have them go over to a task that is on an iPad that is cognitive, where they have to think. I'm driving their neuroplasticity with physical movement. It really gets the brain opening up because you're like, whoa, I'm moving my body. I had to think so much more operating that firearm than I have to do sitting at a table doing a crossword. Like I was like, everything was lit up in my brain, right? All my physiology was on the alert. And what happens is you secrete dopamine. And when you secrete dopamine, you're gonna learn. So things have to be somewhat to have neuroplasticity, there's several factors that need to be. You have to have a focused attention that's sustained. Focused attention that's sustained. When you're shooting a firearm, focused attention and sustained, right? So that was great for us. And it should be an environment that's enjoyable, playful, that stimulates that kind of, so focused attention, sustained, a playful or an up kind of environment.
You should be having fun.
You should be trying to have fun. Yeah, fun. I mean, if you think about it, and when I was reading about this, I was like, what do I have fun at? I don't think I would use that word, like I have fun. I mean, my dear wife would say she has fun, but it's not a word I think about. I go to the park to run. Am I having fun? I love the feeling of it. I love the stimulus, but I don't think it's like fun. I'm not like, I mean, it's just not the way I define it. Mm-hmm. When I work out in my garage, in my gym, Is that fun? I mean, I love it, but it's not really fun. When I work in my garden, which is really wonderful to be outside, expanding your visual field, that's lowers the threshold of arousal. And is it fun for me? So I have different, way to describe it. But if you can have an enjoyable environment of something you're doing, and you can start by moving your body, you can start stimulating dopamine, and then you can layer on that something cognitive. Like then I would give you a focus task. Like, Shawn, come on over here. Okay, on this computer, I want you to find, like, remember the old maid where you turn things, isn't that what it's called? You turn over the cards, you have to memory. Mm-hmm. I might have you do that on an iPad after you did all this movement with your body and you're like, whew, I'm a little bit out of it now. Okay, come on, let's try this now. So I'm layering on top after I've driven dopamine. Now I'm going to have you use that dopamine to focus on something.
Oh, wow. This is,
So how passive is it? Are you driving dopamine doing it? I mean, grandmothers are not kicking out too much dopamine doing a crossword puzzle. I mean, I'm just saying that like my old image, right? That's not much dopamine. So cognitive tasks are important, but if you can open the window to neuroplasticity through the body movements and through getting dopamine going, and it has to have a certain time amount. This is the other component to neuroplasticity. Sustain, focus attention, fun environment for a certain amount of time. How much time? 7 to 22 minutes. When you get to the point of frustration, you ever play a musical instrument? I don't. My son tried to teach me twice. It's an homage to my son, Zach. Okay, so he tried to teach me twice to play the guitar. One day, one lesson, but hard on my fingers. But that's when you get frustrated with something, that's when you need to lean in. And that's where plasticity develops.
okay.
This is all coming from Dr. Huber, and so I may be quoting the time wrong. But, right, you're shooting baskets, you're not making anything. You're gonna stop. But if you say, I'm gonna hang in there, I'm gonna adjust something, I'm gonna keep trying it, and you're pushing a little bit, and you're pushing, that's where you start to push that dopamine out, and you're starting to develop new motor responses, the frontal brain, and more dopamine, so I can get this. That's where most of us quit. So we have to press in, we have to lean in, and we can use our physical abilities, if we're younger, to open the door to neuroplasticity, and we can layer on top of that something cognitive. Maybe it's attention, maybe it's focus, maybe it's mood reduction. I'm able to go from a high state to a lower state really quick. If you can do that, then you start changing your brain.
Interesting. So I had a friend, he was a SEAL. He's actually my best friend. He's also was a phenomenal hockey goalie. And he used to do all these, it sounds very similar to what you're talking about. It used to be, I don't know what the hell he was doing, but he'd be calling out numbers and shapes and colors, and he'd have to touch them as fast as he can. And so you can, I always thought you couldn't improve the hand-eye coordination. I thought it was just something you were born with.
No, you can train it. You can train it. You can improve it. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. It's usually reaction time, and that's one of the measures or the metrics that we use to determine brain injury. But we can also use it. We say brain injury, because there's so many people actually that have injurious forces to their brain that they never get diagnosed because they're pretty good. Like a child falls off of monkey bars and they hit their head. Well, even our grandson the other day, his sister was chasing him, wet floor slip, bam, hit his head on the floor, on tile floor. Did he have a brain injury? He seems fine. He was, low key and everything. He didn't have to go to the hospital. But it's an impact to the brain. That's what we know. And in an impact, especially at a young age, developmentally, it's pruning. He's a little older than your son. His brain is pruning. Maybe it disrupts a little bit of the networks. And maybe we don't know that until he's 14. And now he has attention problems. We don't. So this is one of the thoughts. It's like, man, I never really thought about it. Like the brain is susceptible. And we take a lot of things to the head, right? Especially if you play sports.
Yeah.
So, so he was doing things, and you can improve hand-eye speed, which is reaction time, which is actually, it helps prevent falls in the elderly.
Okay.
Right? Because if you're falling, you get that hand out there faster, because usually if your brain is slowing down, you're very slow to react, and you're going to hit the floor. And we know what happens then you get another head injury, you break something, and it's always hard to recover when you're 60 or older.
Okay.
You know.
Well, let's take a quick break. When we come back, I want to get into some of the long-term effects that people are having from COVID.
Sounds good.
As a parent, my number one priority is the well-being of my kids. I want to make sure as a dad I am giving them everything they need to thrive, grow, and succeed in today's society, both now and in the future. And so it might be time to start looking at life insurance from Fabric by Gerber Life. Make sure your kids are set up no matter what happens. Fabric was designed by parents for parents to help you get a high-quality, surprisingly affordable term life insurance policy in less than 10 minutes. Fabric's new lower prices could mean potentially significant savings over other providers with great quality policies like $1 million in coverage for less than $1 a day. It takes less than 10 minutes to apply, see your quote, and then personalize your quote to fit your family's needs. You could be offered coverage instantly with no health exam required. Fabric is partnered with Gerber Life, trusted by millions of families like yours for over 50 years. They also have over 1,600 five-star reviews on Trustpilot.com. Protect your family today with Fabric by Gerber Life. Get your personalized quote in seconds at meetfabric.com/Shawn. That's meetfabric.com/Shawn. MEET fabric.com/Shawn. Policies issued by Western Southern Life Assurance Company. Not available in certain states. Prices subject to underwriting and health questions. Here at Shawn Ryan Show, we are constantly expanding, thanks to you all. And with expansion comes new job opportunities. I run an extremely tight ship here. We are a very close-knit group, and we're like family. And so when we need to hire for a new position, that can be, how do I say this, very challenging. We need the right person, the perfect person for both the job and to fit in with this company's culture. Whether you're starting a new business or growing a new business, if you want to be successful, you need the most talented people on your team. And that's where ZipRecruiter comes in. Right now, you can try it for free. It's ZipRecruiter.com/SRS. ZipRecruiter's powerful technology enables you to find the perfect match for the job description that you're trying to fill. On top of that, if you see, maybe 2 or 3 candidates that aren't applying for the job, with ZipRecruiter, you can send them a personalized note and invite them to apply for your job opening if they're not seeing it. Let ZipRecruiter fill all your roles with the right candidates. 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get quality candidates within the first day. See for yourself. Go to this exclusive web address to try ZipRecruiter for free, ZipRecruiter.com/SRS. Again, that's ZipRecruiter.com/SRS. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. Serious question. Who wants to take the best shit of their entire life? Right here, I do. How do you do that? You go with Bubs Naturals Collagen Protein. You rip the thing open, you put it in your coffee, you stir it up, and you're on your way. Now, if taking the best shit of your entire life doesn't interest you, collagen will also give you beautiful hair, great skin, and nails to die for. So, and you'll recover a lot quicker in between workouts if that's your thing. So now that we got the good shit out of the way, get it? Let me tell you a little bit about Bubs the company. Bubs is a tribute company to Glenn Bubs Doherty, who was a Navy SEAL and a CIA contractor who died defending American freedom in Benghazi, Libya. Bubs donates 10%
of all proceeds to veteran organizations like the Glenn Doherty Foundation, and 100% of all proceeds on Veterans Day. Let me tell you about Bub's latest product that helps with energy, healthy digestion, your immune system, and your metabolism. Bub's Naturals Apple Cider Vinegar Gummies, which actually taste so damn good that I ate all 60 of them the first night I got them. They taste amazing, and man, I got a lot of energy now. Anyways, go to bubsnaturals.com, use promo code Shawn to take 20% off your order. Thank you, Bubs Naturals, for being a sponsor of the Shawn Ryan Show.
All right, Doc, we're back from the break. I want to get into long-term COVID effects. So we've heard all about the brain fog. People are claiming that, this is lasting a lot longer than just when you're actually sick with COVID. Is there any truth to this?
Definitely. There's
There
definitely
is.
truth. Yeah, people are suffering pretty dramatically. On some levels, very dramatically. Like they're debilitated. They cannot function anymore. And then, there's a continuum of people that have some effects of long COVID, little less. And then people like myself, I don't have any long COVID, fortunately. So I'm going to go back to the model for a minute, because why would people be having these longer term effects of immune things on the brain? The brain falls apart. So we know that bacteria and viruses, when we get an infection, it's going to create inflammation. That's part of any process. COVID is a stronger one, of course, right? So it's a stronger viral situation. And we know that there are receptors for some of the proteins from that virus in the brainstem and in other areas of the brain. But there's a high distribution in the brainstem. So it tends to attack it more.
Okay.
So there is long COVID. Again, what do we know? We know there is this thing called long COVID. We know that it does not matter if you had a mild case or a moderate or severe case. That doesn't dictate necessarily that you're going to have long COVID or not have it. It could have been a mild to moderate case, and you could develop long COVID symptoms or continued symptoms like chronic. And it could have been a severe case, and you don't have long COVID. So that's not really defining whether you have it or not. It's what do you have now? What symptoms do you have now? And so they're quite varied.
Okay.
Some people have cognitive symptoms like brain fog. Some people have cardiac symptoms like tachycardia, a racing heart.
What do you mean brain fog? Like they're just sluggish all day, or what is that?
So there's actually even research to define criteria. What is brain fog? And so it's got a lot of different components for different people. But I was just explaining to someone the other day, think about when your attention is high and you're very sharp, like, okay, that's not brain fog. And what's the opposite of that? Like, I'm sluggish. I can't quite get my thoughts clearly together. When I've gotten sick in the past, especially when I did have COVID a couple of years ago, it was hard to think like that day. I mean, I had a fever. I was not well. So you'd say, well, that's obvious. Yeah, well, that's it. Imagine if that continues.
Okay.
Day after day. And you're like, I had a cup of coffee. I can't clear my head. I can't get sharp. So that would be the easy way to define it, rather than like, here's a list of all the different possibilities of brain fog, but it's that lack of that crisp sharpness of your mind. You're just like blunted. And it's like a lot of people say, I need a cup of coffee or two in the morning before I can get started. That's not that they have brain fog, but that's a good example. So when the brainstem gets attacked, because they have a higher number of receptors for that COVID virus, some of the proteins on it, that area is what many times, not only, but many times drives long COVID symptoms. Because this is that expensive real estate that I talked about. It's controlling everything, right? When we're a baby, this is what we have in here. And this all develops later as the brain develops much larger. I mean, we have it, but it's not fully developed.
Okay.
Right? So it's all going to become wired together, and it's going to grow in size from a baby to an adult. But the brainstem is running everything. All of your survival mechanisms, all of that. So the brainstem tends to get attacked. other areas of the brain are affected, and it can create long COVID. What's going on? Neuroinflammation or inflammation from an infection that goes unchecked, right? Imagine an injury to the knee, like a model I used before, and that inflammation doesn't go down. 6 months, you're like, oh my goodness, this is not going away. Got to get that inflammation down. That's one mechanism. Sometimes it's the inflammation. Sometimes it's injury to some of the tissues from the inflammation, and that needs rehabilitation, which is what people don't think about. They think about, of course, is there medication I can use to help bring down some of these symptoms? That's a reasonable thought. I even think that. And then what they don't think about, which now what I'm presenting to you in this is, you may have to rehabilitate that, just like a knee that was injured. I may need to do, and that's obvious. Of course you need to do rehabilitation on a knee that's repaired. How do you rehabilitate the brainstem? That's what we do in functional neurology. We map out what we need to rehabilitate. Is it the right? Is it the left? Is it the top? Is it the bottom? Because why? This is running all of your systems, your heart rate, your blood pressure, blood flow throughout your body. It's sending projections up to the brain. So it's got everything, balance systems and mechanisms. So it's like central to everything. And people with long COVID, often I would say higher than 60%, this is involved in a situation which may respond well. I'm not going to be the answer to everything, right? But it may respond well to rehabilitation for them, among other things that they are going to need to do.
Okay.
And we're going to see millions and millions of cases just because millions and millions of people were affected.
Are there any reports of people who are asymptomatic having long-form COVID? Or
No.
Long COVID, excuse me. It's
No.
long COVID, correct?
It wouldn't be asymptomatic. If you have long COVID, you have symptoms.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. How long is this lasting? Is this going on forever until somebody treats it?
It may. That's the problem.
Wow.
It may decrease on its own. It may not. And again, my thought is, my consideration, and there's lots of research pouring in on this, and I have thousands of articles, or maybe 1,000 articles already that I've downloaded on this, trying to plow through those as quick as I can. But if something is injured in the physical body, again, the knee is a good example. We realize that rehabilitation, strengthening, stretching, some kind of therapy to rehabilitate is probably necessary. So I'm hopeful that people will say, maybe rehabilitation might be necessary to help me recover. Because it's not a common thought, right? I don't believe it's a common thought based on my experience in, people all over the country is, if you have a stroke, yes, rehabilitation. People, yeah, of course you need rehabilitation. But if you have a concussion, not everybody understands what kind of rehabilitation. And then if you have an infection that affects your brain, I think it's the bridge isn't there, in my opinion. I don't think it bridges it. How am I going to rehabilitate that? That's what we're talking about today, that there are therapies that can rehabilitate the brainstem or the frontal lobe or the temporal lobe, which may improve their long COVID symptoms, reduce them. So their brain becomes less foggy, their balance becomes better, their heart rate control becomes better. A lot of them develop something called dysautonomia, which is a really long word. It's the automatic system of the brainstem is dysregulated. Now they can't control things like blood pressure and heart rate, and it's very debilitating. Like imagine standing up and your heart rate shoots up through the roof. And those people are struggling. We treat a lot of people with dysautonomia from long COVID as a symptom. Man,
that's horrible.
It's terrible. I mean, I recently seen on Twitter many people just their lives are totally changed because they can't function anymore, and not older people necessarily. So, there's a reality to a lot of these things. We just need to kind of peel back all the other things and say, what's really going on, and how can we help people? How can we help people? That's the key.
Yeah. Let's move into addiction. So okay. I've struggled with addiction. My wife has struggled with addiction. A lot of my friends have struggled with addiction. I just want to kind of talk to you about addiction. How are we getting addicted to things, especially things like social media? Like what's going on in the brain there?
Yeah, I mean, big part of humanity is that. So let's say this. Let's go back to the model because it just helps give a visual. So this is the side of the brain. It's the left side of the brain. This is the brain stem. Well, right in here in the brain stem, the upper part is an area that makes dopamine. And dopamine drives our desire for things. So if I fire that by
Dopamine is desire for things. Mm-hmm. So in social media context, it would be like a desire to be acknowledged,
anything,
likes, you want
desire,
likes.
craving, whatever you want to call it. But
Okay.
dopamine is more basically, it's going to be the motivation, right? Whatever you attach to that is what's going to connect.
Okay.
So I'm gonna use an example from Las Vegas. Several years ago, I got asked to speak at a conference out there. Most of the hotels, when you come down to the lobby, are casinos. And I didn't notice it the first day, but the next morning when I came down, there was quite a few people there at 7 in the morning. And a lot of the slot machines have vertical things that roll, right? Or roll or move vertical. Not the tables and things like that. But I was noticing it. I watched it for a few minutes. I was getting a cup of coffee. And there's something interesting with that. So our vertical eye movements are controlled from the area that produces dopamine. So vertical eye movements. What else is a vertical eye movements? Your phone, right? What else? Your computer. But those gambling machines are vertical eye movements that go fast. And then I saw a lot of people smoking. So now you have nicotine firing up the brain more. Coffee, more attention, more firing up. All those things are going to drive dopamine. Vertical eye movements are controlled by the upper brain stem. So in a way, you could say, I could drive more dopamine production and attach you to something or get you addicted to something by using a lot of vertical eye movements. And connecting that to something that's emotionally charged, whether it's whatever image it is. It's emotionally charged, so you're emotional about it. I'm going to win, and now you're driving dopamine, the desire, and you have vertical eye movements, and all these things fit together, and they drive addiction, for sure.
Okay.
I'll say, well, what's the answer for us who were before phones? Whenever we have that dopamine being surged, and we attach it to something emotional that we want, that's going to connect. And we know that certain things drive more dopamine. So cocaine would drive a huge surge of dopamine, amphetamines, huge surge of dopamine. And so, different things have been measured, like 1-fold increase, 5-fold increase, 100-fold increase.
Is an adrenaline dump a dopamine dump?
Not necessarily, but they're usually connected.
Okay.
Yeah.
How so?
Because they're both preparing the body for something, right? But I can have more dopamine secreted without moving my body around the room at all. And I'm going to move that adrenaline around. I'm going to probably move my body around. But that's harder to say that they're separate. I'd say if you have a huge adrenaline push from something, you're probably getting a huge dopamine rush also.
Okay. Reason I'm asking is I've been told, and I believe it's true, that a lot of military guys coming out of the military are, to include myself, are addicted to adrenaline. I know I am addicted to adrenaline.
I would say you're addicted to dopamine
Okay.
more than adrenaline. Right. It's dopamine because it's the desire for it. Like, I need that. I have to move. I have to go in that direction. We used to call them adrenaline junkies, right? The bungee jumping and all these things. But it's the dopamine. That's the thing that's moving you towards your what you want. It's dopamine first.
So are we subconsciously just going throughout the day, just trying to find things that are going to release dopamine?
Well,
Social media,
actually,
bungee jumping.
That's the thought. Is that dopamine has been said that dopamine will get you up to move you to something. Serotonin will not. Serotonin is, I got it. Dopamine moves you towards something. So I kind of flippantly say like dopamine is what built mankind in
So
terms
is
of
dopamine sounds like it's the drive.
it's the drive.
So is dopamine coming out when you want something or when you receive it?
When you start thinking about doing it. It's what's going to get you up and get you out.
Okay.
Going to look for something, whether it's positive or negative. Dopamine is the chemical that your brain produces that's going to move you forward into action. Because you want something. You want I want a water. Dopamine's going to, it's not going to be much dopamine to get me up to go get a thing of water, but it might be a lot more dopamine if I'm going to go after something that I really want.
Is dopamine harmful?
It's completely made in our body, but you can push too much dopamine and
Okay.
become addicted. You're addicted to something, but it's actually that dopamine that you really like.
What about serotonin?
So always in balance, always in balance. And that's where a lot of the treatment has gone to, is treating it because you have a chemical imbalance, right?
Why aren't we addicted to the serotonin release? We're obviously
Well, they're
addicted
connected.
They are connected.
They're connected.
Okay.
Yeah. Your drive to get it and then your satisfaction with getting it. Oh, yeah, that was good. Right? So they're connected. Yeah.
How long do these last in your brain when they're released?
Different half-lives. I'm not even certain of those anymore, but not a long time. Not a long time.
Okay. And then so with addiction, alcohol, cocaine, what else? What else were we talking about? These other addictions, they're all releasing
Yeah.
more dopamine. And
Yeah.
so that's the real addiction.
Yeah, it is.
What about
Dopamine's-
heroin?
Oh yeah, all addictions, anything that's driving the dopamine, and it's been said that it's the pursuit of that thing that's really the big push of dopamine, the pursuit of it. Once you get it, it's gonna, you're gonna cycle down because you got it. So it's even before you do whatever you do with that drug, if it's a drug or if it's gambling, before you throw the dice, it's getting out to Vegas, it's on the plane, it's in the car, it's getting to the casino, that's where it's all going, taking you there. And you throw the dice, and you're like, all right. And then it's maybe for the next win, and maybe the next win, and now it keeps cycling up.
Okay.
But you can burn that out, those systems. You can overrun them too much, and because there's cells that are producing dopamine, they can be overworked, overstimulated, and it takes progressively more of whatever that was to bring you satisfaction, addiction.
Okay. Do you if you don't, that's fine, but do you have any knowledge of why psychedelics are having such success in treating addiction?
I don't have any direct understanding, except based on what I know, I'd say the default mode network, going back to that, and the way it changes its function and interacts with other regions of the brain is probably what's behind that.
Okay.
So again, these networks touch a lot of other areas in the brain. And so I'm talking about the upper brainstem. And so when you change the default mode network, which is this big grouping of neurons and areas, it must have a direct impact on that mechanism.
Okay. Back to long COVID. We had a conversation last night at dinner, and we had talked about what we talked about, but you had also mentioned that if somebody was on the tipping point,
Yeah.
and then COVID hit,
Yes.
that was the
I took
driving
that from a
factor.
friend of mine in mental health, and
Okay.
he's just a wonderful guy. And he said, if people were teetering with alcoholism or teetering with some problem, OCD, anxiety, they're not really teetering anymore. Now, this is going back, right, in that first year or so. Mm-hmm. And we saw everything went up: anxiety, OCD, domestic violence, alcoholism, everything went up. So, yeah, it pushed people over the edge that were on the edge of some things. Hopefully some of them have come back. They've been able to dial it down and get help, but some no. We've seen more cases of OCD in the past 3 years since COVID than we've seen in the combined 10 years before. So it's telling. It's telling that it's been quite a stressor on the world and people in general for whatever reasons. Illness, politics, money, sickness, fear. It's like, I always think about like a stove. and all of a sudden the heat got turned up on everything. And I'm not talking climate change. I'm talking about just the stress level in the world in general, just turn up. So now you're operating at a higher level of stress among everyone. And some people handle it better than others.
Last thing I wanted to cover is in your outline, you had written, we're three-part beings, body, soul, and spirit. I just wanted to talk to you about that. Can you explain that?
Yeah, it's important. I met a chaplain at one of the hospitals, the local hospitals, some years ago. And he said, and he worked with all the physicians if they were, interested in any type of help. Of course, he worked with the patients, but he said, if we're only treating the physical part of the person, the body, as a physician, we're missing 2/3. I thought that was pretty telling. Because medicine is rolling ahead, and not to anyone's fault. We just know how things are. It moves fast. I call it fast medicine. I'm for the slow medicine movement, if there's such a thing. Like the slow food movement came about out of Italy, from fast food to slow food, farm to table, making your own food. Slow it. Medicine maybe needs to go to the same way, because it just rolls by. You have this, take this. You have this, take that. And just listening to people, getting into what's going on, trying to get to the source. But he said that 2/3 of the patient or the person is not being dealt with. And I said, well, let's talk about that. The soul and the spirit, right? So we have the body, the soul, which is the mind, the emotions, and the will. And that's where a lot of damage occurs in your mind. And we're talking about the mind. The mind is an emergent property of the brain, right? Out of my brain emerges my mind and my thoughts and your emotions, right? In the brain. And we actually know that the right prefrontal area of the brain of all human beings is where the conscience is.
Really?
Yeah. Because if you have an injury there, substantial enough injury, you lose all empathy for people. It's like gone. And this has been documented in a very old case, actually, a guy who had a very bad injury and how he just changed completely and he was like flat. And so you even see this in criminal behavior many times if they're able to do scans on those people. So you got the mind, you got the emotion, and you got the will. All that stuff is brain-related function. Mm-hmm. So that's that soul, and that can really get injured. You go to the battlefront. You have a difficult time at home, domestic violence. You have, all these. That's who we are. That's our persona. But then there's this deeper part, which is the spirit. And a lot of people say those are the same. I use more of a Christian view on that. And I haven't always been. I mean, I was early in my life. As I told you, I didn't believe. I didn't believe in anything. I was like a teenager, and that wasn't my bag. And so understanding the spirit is a deeper part of the human being. And there's so many things that talk about that, from Spirit Airlines to, a broken spirit. And, you hear it all the time, that referred to. So those, in a way, need to be cared for. And that's what he was saying.
Okay.
And I appreciated that. And I think you really care for the physical body, but you care for the person, their soul, with empathy. Right? And that goes by the wayside, especially if you're busy. Like, I just got to get this done. And then the spirit is a deeper conversation. And every human being, my belief is that every human being has a spirit. That's been born into us. But most of us don't really know how to operate it. And if you don't know how to operate something, or you don't know its operations, you may not be able to really function with that very well. And so his perspective, and it's my perspective, and it's whoever's open. If I sense the need, so it's not the first thing that comes out. I'm glad we end on that, because if I've been through what you and many of your colleagues have been through, that would be something I would need someone to help me with, I think. We all need to help each other. It's not like anyone's there. But helping somebody with that, if they don't have that, and of course some of the people on your show that I've okay, I see. Because if it's the deepest part of you, and I can share something that strengthens it, encourages it, and then that's something that you take up, like I took up, or anyone takes up, and I believe that, then that could really be very beneficial for them to move forward.
Yeah.
Because this is going down. This is eventually going down. And this is going down eventually, but not the spirit. that's going to be sustained. So that's the perspective on that. And I think it's vital. If I don't say it, then you said all this great things, great information, but you dealt with the body. Maybe you dealt a little bit with the mind, but you kind of left these other very vital things of humanity. And so I feel like that's so vital.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Well, Doc, do you have anything coming up that you want to talk about, or?
We didn't talk about the Dolphins.
We didn't talk about the Dolphins. We need to talk about the Dolphins. I can't believe
I
cannot believe that.
And I
slipped my
forgot. I
mind.
forgot it too. Okay, so the Dolphins, and we're not talking football. We're not talking football. We're talking about an animal-assisted therapy program that we developed down in the Florida Keys, working with dolphins, and it's probably one of the ways we connected originally. So we developed land-based and water-based activities with the dolphins to help restore brain function. And I'll tell you, when we talk about the soul and you get in the water and you see those dolphins and you do some of the therapies in the water, it really nourishes your soul. You just feel, I mean, it's my wife and she even more, but you just see them and you feel happy. You can't help it. They look like they have a giant smile and they're 400-pound like puppy dogs. And they look at you in their eyes and you can tell, and they're of course highly intelligent. Their brain is very similar to ours. And even larger in some regions. And they use echolocation to communicate. We are visual creatures, right? Human beings. Dogs smell, but bats and dolphins, echolocation is their primary sense. So in the water, they're constantly echolocating on our clients. So we're measuring everything with our client. We're treating them on dry land. Then we have time in the water with the dolphins. Then we do again dry land, brain training, comprising all these suites of therapies, then more time in the water with the dolphins. And what we get out of that is pretty dramatic changes with some people. I don't want to say everyone because it sounds again like, oh yeah, but it's really an experience that can be transformative for many people because you don't get an opportunity to do that very often. And we develop specific in-water exercises with the dolphin behaviors that you do actually touching the dolphins, in direct contact while they're echolocating. And we had this one client that I shared with you and your wife last night who was dealing with seizure disorder. And we've had people with PTSD and Asperger's and a variety of different conditions. But this woman with seizures, the dolphin would not leave the area of her head when she's laying on her back in the water, just kept echolocating. And the marine mammal specialist who wanted to move the dolphin away, because it's part of the therapy that we do, she said, this dolphin will not move from this woman's head. So what was happening there? I mean, we have recordings from hydrophones. We know there's a lot of echolocating going on. This woman had a pretty transformative experience. It's remarkable. So yeah, that's something that we have on an individual one-by-one basis now. So
that's incredible.
It's really something.
So in your mind, are you sure that dolphin knows, something's going on in that part of the brain?
I'm almost 60. I'm not sure of anything. Really. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure. This is what I think. Mm-hmm. And they've said that before. The marine mammal specialists spend countless hours caring for these dolphins like they're their children. So this is not like a show. These people care for these dolphins because people get upset by that. They get bothered sometimes. These dolphins were all rescued dolphins. Some of them a former Navy dolphin. And so these dolphins are all cared for like as well as people's children. They love these dolphins, these animals. They take care of them. And they're so intimate with them that they say, we have people that they will stay closer to. And we find out later that they have had X, Y, and Z conditions when they're doing other work with them, because it's not just limited. They're not my dolphins. So dolphins do that. They have a certain connection, like a horse, like hippotherapy, animal-assisted therapy, very connected to people, or dogs, of course. We know that, how connected they are. And, they have a soul. So there's some kind of connection. But I'm not certain of anything. But that's what I think is going on, and it's dramatic, and it's wonderful. And if I could do it all the time, that's what I would do.
Do you have any idea how they would know that?
Echolocation. Yeah, I mean, I can tell things by seeing, like you. They can tell things internally by echolocating. It goes right through your tissues.
Wow.
So yeah, that echolocation is such high frequencies that it can determine what's going on. And so I mean, they're extremely sensitive to changes in the environment and things.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
I cannot wait to get down to Miami and pay you guys a visit.
Well, we will welcome you with open arms.
I'm really excited to come down there and pay you guys a visit. But I just want to say thank you so much for coming on. I just learned. I'm gonna have to watch this 3 or 4 times to take it all in. But thank you for giving us all the knowledge, and it's just a real pleasure to interview. Thank you.
My pleasure. Such an honor.
And all your links, everything will be posted down at the bottom of the description. And so for anybody looking to get in touch with Dr. Bagnell, head down to the description. Everything's there.
Thank you very much.
Wish you the best of luck. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Hey everybody, I'm Shawn Ryan. Click here to subscribe to the Shawn Ryan Show YouTube channel for the hottest and most compelling interviews that you will not see anywhere else. I've also made a playlist of all the previous SRS episodes so they're easy to find. You can find that right here.